Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Carolyn Watson. If kidnapping is not about satisfying the criminal's painful desires, then most often, the attackers seek money. But it is not always that simple. Some frightening actions have a much more mundane nature. Budgeree, in Australia, does not seem like a place where something terrifying could happen. It is a rural and remote area with a population of fewer than 200 people. Located in the peaceful region of Victoria, it is not even marked on all maps. The local community consists of only a few dozen families, and everyone knows each other well. However, this calm and measured pace did not prevent criminal stories from surfacing. The media began to write about the quiet and prosperous life in Budgeree, which changed in 2008 due to an event that made the entire continent shudder. A man named Julian Buchwald, 25, lived there. His family owns a large piece of land in the area. Julian had a girlfriend, 17-year-old Carolyn Watson, who lived in a neighboring town. They had been dating for about 2 years. Even in his younger years, Julian loved to explore the surroundings, especially his plot of land, to satisfy his natural curiosity. The difficult terrain, combined with the abundance of vegetation, offered plenty of opportunities for imagination and exploration. Both Julian and Carolyn continued to live with their parents. Despite dating for 2 years, they were very serious about their relationship. They often discussed the prospects of marriage. Being deeply religious individuals, just like their families, they even visited the local pastor of the church to declare their desire to marry during a Sunday service, where they had first met. Faith played a significant role in their lives. On the morning of March 4, 2008, Julian picked up Carolyn from her home for a picnic. She lived in the neighboring town of Churchill, which was a bit larger, with about 5,000 people. It was located about 20 minutes away by car from Budgeree. After leaving, they returned to Julian's house because he had forgotten some food in the car that could spoil in the heat. They gathered everything they needed and quickly left before it got too hot. Typically, Julian and Carolyn would relax on Julian's family property, where there were plenty of secluded spots that looked picturesque for a romantic outing. However, this time, they decided to venture further to visit a nearby waterfall. Around 3 p.m., they planned to return. Most of the journey went smoothly, but just before reaching the waterfall, Julian suddenly became alarmed. He noticed the carcass of an animal on the side of the road, so he slowed down and stopped at a safe distance around a small bend. He told Carolyn that he wanted to get out to check, as he thought the animal might still be alive and he could help it. This curiosity wasn't unusual for him. Carolyn had gotten used to these quirks and decided to wait for him inside the SUV while following his movements in the rearview mirror. At some point, Carolyn became distracted. When she looked back again, she no longer saw Julian. She assumed he had gone behind the hill or a turn, which is why she was out of view. But after some time, Julian still hadn't returned, and this began to worry her. He always came back quickly. Realizing they were far from the city and in the wilderness, Carolyn was afraid to get out of the car. Her boyfriend's absence increasingly troubled her. Suddenly, she caught sight of something even more frightening in the mirror. A figure darted into view. She saw a man standing next to the car. He looked threatening, fully dressed with gloves, and wearing a balaclava. Carolyn intended to lock the doors of the car, but the stranger had already jumped to her side, opened the door. Before she could react, pulled her out of the car and threw her to the ground. He covered her mouth with tape, silencing her screams, and she could barely resist. Within minutes, the kidnapper had bound and blindfolded her, then shoved her into the trunk of his car. Terrified, Carolyn hoped that Julian would return to save her. However, the kidnapper got behind the wheel and drove away, leaving her alone with her fear. She tried to escape, but the ropes were too tight to loosen. It felt like the trip lasted several hours. Eventually, the SUV came to a stop. The trunk opened. The kidnapper, still wearing a balaclava and gloves, stood in front of her again. He threw her onto the ground, and Carolyn realized she was still unable to free herself from her bindings. Despite her desperate attempts to do so, she had little idea of where she was located, but she saw that there was a dense forest surrounding her. The stranger tore off her clothes, using a knife to cut away her underwear, and then walked away. Carolyn was completely naked, lying next to the car. She heard a sound as if the kidnapper was digging. This noise came from a few meters away. Carolyn realized that she was about to die. She could not imagine what awaited her, but she understood that she would not get out of here alive. The only thing she could do in such a situation was to pray. At that time, Julian's mother and father noticed their absence and that both had left by car. Julian and Carolyn told their parents that they were going on a picnic together but did not specify the location. They were expected to return around 3 p.m., but the clock now read around 5 p.m. While everything could be attributed to youth and passion, Julian and Carolyn was always very responsible, was never late, especially for an extended period. Julian's mother called her son, but he didn't answer. Carolyn also ignored the calls. This was uncharacteristic for them, as they always stayed in touch. A delay of several hours seemed unthinkable, considering that they had not warned anyone that they would be late. The parents inspected the area around the house but found no traces of Julian and Carolyn. A search operation alone on such a large piece of land seemed pointless, so Julian's mother decided to return to the house and wait for them in the driveway. Suddenly, she discovered something strange. She saw a glint as from glass and found a bottle with a note inside that was stuck in the fence mesh. She read it, and its contents horrified her. Some criminal had written that he had kidnapped Julian and Carolyn. The text was full of obscene language. The criminal warned the parents not to report it to the police, otherwise, Carolyn would be burned alive, and Julian would die in agony. The kidnapper spoke of some business he had to attend to, stating that if he succeeded, the children would return home safe and sound, but only if the parents complied with all his demands. This message horrified she. Though she panicked, she was not going to follow the demands of the criminal and reported the matter to the police. Law enforcement officers immediately responded to the call and began to inspect the area, which was rugged terrain with a lot of vegetation. There was much work to be done. Relatives hoped that Julian and Carolyn had secluded themselves in the area since they rarely left Butchery. The family's situation worsened when Julian's relatives found out that both Julian's and Carolyn's families had received ominous notes. The families of Julian and Carolyn and the detectives met to discuss what had happened. Carolyn's father found a similar bottle on the porch of their house, which contained a message insisting that they not contact the police, also threatening to kill Julian and Carolyn. Even worse, he promised to deal with the entire family if his demands were violated. Everyone wondered what could possibly have motivated the hatred toward this sweet couple of young people. Initially, it was believed that that were just a cruel joke. Now the police had two notes, as well as the real disappearance of Julian and Carolyn. Until late in the evening, neither Julian nor Carolyn had made contact. The handwriting in both letters was identical. That means that the two families may have a common enemy. However, no one had the slightest idea who he might be. It was curious that the note contained a symbol that seemed to have an occult nature. Some group that considered Christians their enemies. This was considered a valuable clue, and it was quickly discovered that it was used by a certain satanic cult called the Order of Nine Angles. The history of this organization was checked and found that it had appeared in Great Britain back in the 60s, was actively luring in members in the 70s. However, the cult did not become widespread and did not have a large number of followers. Some of its members were being held accountable for extremist ideology and various threats. As the activists gained notoriety, the group opened branches in several countries around the world. Their ideology included isolating their members from the rest of society. They openly advocated for violence and committing crimes against perceived enemies, specifically targeting Christians whom they recognized as opponents to be destroyed. The most frightening aspect of this movement's activities was the propaganda promoting human sacrifices, which horrified families and prompted the police to intensify their efforts. Julian and Carolyn were simply devout Christians. Interestingly, until that point, the activities of this group had only been observed in Australia. They could potentially attempt to declare themselves by committing their first ritual murder. Satanists might use the sacrifice of Julian and Carolyn to gain fame from there began to gather like-minded people. The relatives did not receive any news for several days. Julian's car was declared wanted, but that didn't help. All the detectives' efforts proved in vain as they couldn't find either Julian and Carolyn or any leads on where to continue searching. Considering who Carolyn and Julian may have contacted, it was believed that it would be impossible to return they alive. The relatives knew that they had packed only a small amount of food meant to last a few hours. They had no worn clothes and no equipment. They did not have tents to survive the temperature fluctuations that occur in Australia during the day and night. There were also concerns about dangerous areas where Julian and Carolyn could fall victim to predators. The scorching heat and hunger posed significant threats. Even if they escaped from their kidnappers, encounters with wild or poisonous animals could be deadly. The rescue operation transitioned to a recovery effort, but this, too, yielded no results. 6 days passed during which the families of Julian and Carolyn did not find any peace. Suddenly, a message arrived: Julian and Carolyn had been found. What was most astonishing was that both were relatively safe. They had simply emerged onto the roadway near the Alpine National Park. A passing farmer stopped to help and immediately reported their situation to the police. It was not surprising that law enforcement officers were unable to find any trace of the individuals Julian and Carolyn. The national park was several hundred kilometers from where they lived, requiring about a 6-hour drive by car. Julian sustained serious injuries. While making their way through the desert, he suffered sunburn, cuts from thorny bushes, blisters, and bruises all over his body. Nonetheless, aside from the extreme stress of their ordeal, they were otherwise fine. Detectives met with Julian and Carolyn to gather information and prevent potentially dangerous criminals from operating in the area. They first communicated with Carolyn, who detailed the horrific trials she endured after being kidnapped. She described being undressed, thrown to the ground, where she lay and prayed just a few meters away from her kidnapper, who was digging in the earth. She was certain that this was her grave. This agonizing wait continued interminably until the sounds of digging stopped. Carolyn heard footsteps moving away, and everything went silent. Realizing that the criminal had abandoned her, she knew she could not remain passive. Quickly, she attempted to free herself from her ropes, but they did not yield. Her hands hurt as she rubbed them until they bled. Suddenly, she heard Julian's voice calling her name as he crawled closer. He managed to rip off her blindfold and the duct tape from her mouth. Julian, also tied up and without clothes, had managed to free his hands. This allowed Julian to finally escape and then free Carolyn. However, the danger was not over. The kidnapper could return at any moment. There was no car, but the abandoned backpack and scattered contents of the trunk remained. They found supplies that they had taken with them for a picnic, gathered everything, and fled into the thicket. They wanted to get as far away from that place as possible to plan their next steps. Along the way, Julian recounted his story. He approached an animal lying on the side of the road to examine the body, but as he leaned over, he heard footsteps approaching quickly from behind. He didn't have time to react before he was attacked. He was struck on the back of the head hard enough to lose consciousness. According to Julian, when he awoke a few hours later, he immediately began calling out for Carolyn. The criminal was no longer nearby, having escaped in an SUV. Over the next few days, they desperately tried to reach the road, making their way through thick bushes. They risked encountering wild animals. Even the slightest bite from an Australian poisonous spider or snake could be fatal. Their supplies were very limited since they had packed only a small amount of food for their picnic, specifically. During the day, Julian and Carolyn suffered from the suffocating heat, risking sunstroke. At night, they struggled to stay warm, sharing a single sleeping bag. The situation was compounded by the fear that the kidnapper could pursue them and find them at any moment. Both Julian and Carolyn were completely unaware of why this had happened to them. The situation worsened when, a few days later, they unwittingly returned to the same place where they had been held hostage. As it turned out, they had made a large circle. Nevertheless, Julian took advantage of the situation. Despite his fear of being caught, he was able to steal clothes and any remaining food, improving the dire condition of the starving couple. However, everything came to an end quickly. Carolyn fell into despair, feeling that they could not be saved, and found solace only in prayer. Finally, God heard her pleas. After 6 days, they were able to find their way out of the dense bushes. They emerged onto the road, where the police spoke to Julian, for the most part, confirmed his girlfriend's account, except for the part where he claimed to be unconscious. Julian and Carolyn was sent to stay in the hospital and then with their relatives, but law enforcement officers had no time to rest. Despite the miraculous rescue of the kidnapping victims, the armed forces still faced a real threat that the dangerous organization responsible for the kidnapping would continue its destructive activities. It had to be stopped at any cost. Before bloodshed could begin, the police decided to go to the place from which the prisoners had escaped. They found cut pieces of duct tape, clothing, a shovel, and other items, all of which were checked. To the detectives' amazement, some items belonged to Julian, including a rope found in his house's barn. There was also disturbed earth that had been dug up. The detectives discovered a balaclava, black clothing, gloves, and other things described by Carolyn. From that moment, Julian's story became even more disturbing. In particular, Julian was never able to show any signs of the head injuries he claimed to have sustained. Any such injury should have remained visible, especially if Julian had indeed delivered a blow that could have knocked him out for several hours. They decided to talk to Julian again. From the start, the detectives made it clear that they had good reason to suspect him of kidnapping. Julian was nervous but insisted on his story, referring to his beloved, who confirmed much of what he said. However, within a few hours, he was brought to justice. Julian admitted that he had organized the kidnapping himself. He had bought the items he intended to use for the kidnapping in advance, taking some from home, including items that allowed him to hide his face from Carolyn. He had even trained for some time to tie knots that would not injure when immobilizing someone. The cult symbols used in the letters were meant to scare his parents and Carolyn's relatives into not contacting the police, preventing detective intervention. Julian deliberately used foul language in the letters he sent to the Buchwald and Watson families. No one thought he would say such words. Julian had deliberately chosen the longest route to the waterfall to avoid detection and confuse the tracks. The guy kept a lookout for anything suspicious that could attract attention and give him the opportunity to implement his plan. He eventually noticed an animal carcass on the side of the road and decided it was time to act. Julian stopped around a corner to hide from Carolyn's sight, changed his clothes, and returned to the car to play out the rest. The place he had chosen to take Carolyn was far away, allowing them to stay away from people. According to him, when Carolyn heard sounds of earth being dug up, he was actually not making a grave but getting rid of evidence. After that, he got into the car and drove away to hide it in the woods, then he returned to Carolyn. Along the way, he got rid of his clothes and wrapped ropes around his hands to make himself look like a kidnapped person. After that, he began to call her name in a weak voice, pretending that he had just regained consciousness after a blow to the head. The kidnapping was carefully planned. He had items that helped they survive this difficult period. Even the fact that they returned to the place from which they had escaped was part of the plan. However, one aspect still remained unclear. Why stage such a spectacle? 22-year-old Julian admitted that he wanted to marry Carolyn immediately. They had already been dating for 2 years, but she did not agree. 17-year-old Carolyn planned to finish school, decide on her future, go to college, get a job, become independent before finally tying the knot and starting a family. At the same time, both were devout Christians who believed in abstaining from intimate before marriage. He did not want to wait so long. He desperately wanted to satisfy his intimate desires, so he staged the kidnapping. He specifically planned everything so that they would both be isolated during their wandering through the dense thickets. Julian tried various tactics to persuade his girlfriend to be intimate. He reasoned that they might not survive this adventure, and it was worth trying intimate. He also convinced Carolyn that in the face of death, they had entered into an alliance in the fight for their lives, which he equated with marriage. Julian even tried to persuade her that they needed to engage in intimate intercourse to keep warm at night, claiming he had read about such a method somewhere. Carolyn was unwavering, continued to refuse, and insisted on her beliefs, convinced that God would save them. Therefore, his plan ultimately failed. Among the items Julian had prepared for the trip, there was a map of the national park. They had not actually gotten lost when Julian realized Carolyn was not going to give up. Therefore, he decided to lead them out of this national park. After Julian's confession, he was slapped by Carolyn, charged with kidnapping and perjury. The trial was scheduled for August 2009. Julian was not held in jail after the trial because his wealthy family posted bail. Julian took advantage of the situation and made another attempt to escape punishment. In September 2009, he obtained an Indian passport, boarded a plane, and flew to China. The document was obviously fake but of sufficient quality to fool Australian security services. Julian dyed his hair black and spent a long time sunbathing to darken his skin as much as possible, even though he was fair-skinned and required many tanning sessions. Although he managed to fly out of Australia, the Indian security services were more vigilant and refused to let him enter the country. Julian was arrested in Singapore. It was assumed that India was only the first stop on his journey and that Germany was intended to be his final destination. After that, he received a sentence of 7 years and 3 months for kidnapping, as well as an additional 6 months for escaping. He tried to challenge the court's decision, arguing that it was too harsh, but could not contest the fact that the kidnapping in this incident was a significant issue. In another unexpected turn of events, it was revealed that Julian was originally from Germany. His family had moved to Australia at an early age. In 2014, the Immigration Service considered the possibility of canceling his visa. Julian tried to resist this decision but failed. In 2016, he was deported to Germany, ending up in a country where he did not know the language at all. There were no relatives or acquaintances with whom he could start anew. His further fate is not reliably known, and there is no information about whether he went to prison. According to some sources, Julian's situation has worsened. On the other hand, Carolyn could not come to her senses for a long time after such a betrayal. It was difficult for her to learn to trust people, especially men. What happened in her life afterward is unknown. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jessica Stasinowski and Valerie Paraschimpti. Stacey Mitchell was born in Dorset, England, into a loving and close-knit family. She had an older brother and 2 younger sisters. At the age of 10, her family relocated from the UK to Australia. Stacey was a cheerful and friendly girl. Her father lovingly referred to her as the soul of the house because of her ability to connect with everyone. She never held grudges and always looked for ways to help her family or learn something new. She enjoyed meeting new people, was very sociable, and had a kind heart. As a teenager, Stacey became friends with 2 older girls she met through a mutual friend. Jessica Stasinowski was 19, and Valerie Paraschimpti was 21. Stacey was drawn to them because they were different from her other friends. Valerie, in particular, was fascinated by the vampire subculture and claimed to have been drinking blood since the age of 10, starting with her own and later that of others. As Stacey grew older, she began to argue more frequently with her parents. She became less interested in playing with her younger sisters and, after disagreements with her parents, would spend long periods upset, isolating herself in her room and feeling misunderstood. On December 7, 2006, Stacey turned 16 and decided to run away from home. It is common for police officers to reassure parents in such situations by saying that their children are growing up and need time with their friends, that they will return home eventually, and that there is no need to panic or take drastic actions. Stacey's parents loved her deeply and were worried, but they decided not to respond harshly. To preserve their relationship with their daughter, they chose to wait and let her stay at a friend's house for a while before involving the authorities. However, after 6 days, they reported her missing to the police on December 13, 2006. When Stacey ran away, her goal was simply to escape her home environment and let things calm down after a recent family argument. However, she wasn't sure where to go, as most of her friends still lived with their parents, and staying with them for days without raising questions wasn't feasible. That's when she thought of her new adult friends, Jessica and Valerie. Both women were older than Stacy and lived in a rented house in the suburbs with a man named David Ross John Haynes. The house was spacious and had an empty bedroom. When Stacy arrived, they offered her the spare room for just $20 per week. Stacy was thrilled because this arrangement seemed to solve her immediate problem. She moved into the empty bedroom on December 14th. She appreciated the newfound freedom, no rules, no arguments, and no one monitoring her actions. Her friends, Jessica and Valerie, who were older, could also help her get alcohol if she wanted. To Stacy, this setup seemed ideal. However, officially, she was still reported missing, and her family was desperately searching for her. Despite any past disagreements, her parents deeply loved her, cared about her well-being, and wanted what was best for her. After several days of searching, Stacy's family was able to contact her on December 17th, 10 days after she had run away. During a phone conversation, Stacy revealed where she was staying. Hoping to repair their relationship without causing further tension, her parents decided not to force her to return home immediately. Instead, they wanted to rebuild trust and avoid pressuring or frightening her. Stacy promised them she would come home the following day. The plan was for her to spend one final night with her friends and then return home. Her parents even arranged to meet her at the train station. The next day, Stacy's parents arrived at the station, eager to reunite with their daughter. However, Stacy was nowhere to be found. They wondered if she had changed her mind, lost trust in them, or simply decided not to return. They waited for a while, hoping she might just be running late, but eventually, they had to return home without her, overwhelmed with worry and confusion about what could have happened. When Stacy failed to show up, her parents reported the matter to the police, providing the address she had given along with the names of the people she had mentioned. It was then officially reported that Stacy had gone missing again. Just a few days later, Stacy's parents' worst fears came true. On December 21st, Stacy's remains were discovered, confirming the tragic outcome. While some reports stated that only a severed leg had been found, others claimed her entire body was recovered. In reality, her corpse was found inside a large plastic wheelie bin behind the house. The tragedy hit even harder when Stacy's family and friends learned the horrific details surrounding her murder. It was revealed that Stacy's new friends, Jessica and Valerie, became irritated with her shortly after she arrived at their house. Stacy's cheerful demeanor, her expectation that they, as older friends, should support her, and her carefree behavior quickly wore on them. Tensions escalated as Jessica and Valerie began arguing, blaming each other for allowing Stacy to stay. They were frustrated by Stacy's habits, such as walking around in her underwear, freely entering rooms, and constantly engaging them in conversation. Their irritation deepened when another roommate, David, told Jessica and Valerie that Stacy had been making unkind remarks about his friends and criticizing their behavior. This led Valerie to conclude that Stacy was interfering with their freedom to live as they pleased. Rather than simply asking her to leave, Valerie decided that the only solution was to permanently get rid of Stacy. Jessica and Valerie began discussing their plans to kill Stacy and revealed their intentions to David. Although hesitant, David did not openly oppose their idea. He later recounted that on December 17th, he saw Jessica grinding glass in a stone bowl in the laundry room. When he asked what she was doing, Jessica openly admitted that she planned to mix the glass into Stacy's food. David pointed out that Stacy's death would be extremely painful and drawn out, as the glass could severely damage her esophagus and intestines, causing her immense suffering and loud screams that might alarm the neighbors. To carry out their plan, Stacy would need to be restrained while the glass was fed to her. They asked David to assist, but he refused. Instead, they offered him the option of simply observing. Meanwhile, Stacy had already informed her parents during a phone call that she planned to meet them on December 18th to return home. She even told David, Jessica, and Valerie about her plans, but they appeared intent on proceeding with their scheme regardless. David said he felt relieved that Stacy would soon be leaving but did nothing to dissuade Jessica and Valerie. On December 18th, Stacy missed her scheduled meeting with her parents. That evening, Stacy, Valerie, Jessica, and David went to a nearby bridge, where they entertained themselves by throwing bottles at passing cars on the highway and running away whenever they disrupted traffic. Late that night, the four returned to the house and sat at the kitchen table, drinking whiskey. Stacy complained about having a headache, so Jessica gave her a pill, claiming it was a painkiller. However, the pill was actually a sleeping aid for insomniacs. Earlier that morning, Valerie had warned David to lock himself in his bedroom and play loud music when the time came to carry out the murder, as he refused to participate. After Stacy took the pill, David noticed Valerie holding a concrete block between her legs. She then turned on music and began dancing. David retreated to his bedroom, leaving Stacy, Valerie, and Jessica in the kitchen drinking whiskey, and he played loud music to drown out the noise. Stacy tried to get up and dance with Valerie and Jessica, but Valerie told her to sit down. Soon after, David heard Jessica yell, "Right now, right now." This was followed by a loud, dull thud and Stacy's screams. Valerie had struck Stacy on the head with the concrete block. Terrified, David stayed in his room, while Jessica briefly came to check on him and found him panicking. David stated that he experienced a severe panic attack. Valerie struck Stacy multiple times with the concrete block before calling for Jessica. Jessica moved back and forth between David's room and Valerie, watching her actions from the doorway. To cover up Stacy's screams, Jessica adjusted the music in David's room, lowering the volume at times to talk to him and increasing it at other times to drown out the horrifying sounds of what was happening. Stacy screamed for help, but David remained indifferent to her pleas. At one point, Stacy crawled to the door of his bedroom, desperately clinging to it. In response, David forcefully slammed the door shut. He then told Jessica that he couldn't bear to witness what was happening and wanted to leave. To help him avoid the scene, Jessica blindfolded him with a black t-shirt and guided him past Stacy and out of the house. She instructed David to keep walking until everything was over and promised to call him later. Despite knowing that a murder was taking place inside, David chose to flee rather than intervene. Meanwhile, Valerie continued attacking Stacy with a concrete block until it broke, but she didn't stop. Eventually, Jessica joined in. She removed her belt, which had a chain attached, and used it to strangle Stacy. Though Stacy struggled fiercely, pulling at the chain and gasping for air, Jessica tightened her grip until Stacy lost consciousness. After succeeding in their plan, Valerie and Jessica celebrated, squealing with delight, hugging each other, and returning to the table to finish the leftover whiskey as part of their gruesome victory. 20 minutes later, Jessica checked Stacy's pulse and found that she was still alive. The kitchen was covered in blood, spattered on the floor and walls, so Valerie grabbed sponges and a mop to start cleaning. 30 minutes later, Jessica checked Stacy's pulse again and discovered she had died. At around 1:30 a.m., David called to ask if everything was done. Jessica confirmed Stacy was dead but explained they needed more time to clean the house and told him to keep walking for a few more hours. David spent the next 2 hours wandering around the neighborhood. While waiting for David to return, Jessica and Valerie continued cleaning the scene. Shockingly, they had filmed the murder, capturing moments of drinking, cleaning, and even mocking Stacy. They laughed, mimicked her accent, and Jessica could be seen laughing and dancing while Stacy's lifeless body lay on the floor. At 3:20 a.m., Jessica called David to let him know the house was still slightly messy but that he could return. Blindfolded once again, David was led into the room. By then, Valerie and Jessica had removed Stacy's body, hidden it in a dumpster behind the house, and started planning how to dispose of it permanently. The next morning, David and the others went to a local hardware store to buy a chainsaw and several shovels. 3 days later, on December 21st, the police showed up at their house shortly after midnight. Jessica managed to escape by running out the door, while Valerie stayed inside and gave the authorities a false name. Valerie and David claimed that Stacy had left and no one knew her whereabouts. 3 hours later, after the police identified Valerie's real name, they returned to the house. This time, only David was present. He confessed that Stacy had been killed by Valerie and Jessica and revealed the location of her body, stuffed inside a plastic container on wheels behind the house. Following their arrests, Valerie was placed in a cell with another inmate, Rachelle Van Roos. Rachelle engaged Valerie in conversation on various topics and later reported that Valerie described the murder without displaying any remorse. Instead, Valerie seemed proud of her actions, claiming that she and Jessica enjoyed themselves immensely while killing Stacy. According to Valerie, they drank and celebrated afterward, thrilled to be rid of Stacy, whom they found annoying and difficult to deal with. Later, Valerie admitted to Rachelle that Stacy had irritated them, blaming her entirely for what had happened. Valerie even disclosed that she and Jessica struck Stacy approximately 180 times during the attack. Valerie added that she regretted how quickly it all ended, wishing she'd had more time to prolong the cruel acts they inflicted on Stacy. In 2007, Jessica wrote about the murder and revealed that when Stacy was killed, she experienced an overwhelming thirst for blood, unlike anything she had felt before. She described how something within her shifted at that moment. When Stacy's blood splashed onto her, it was as if her vision became clouded, and she couldn't stop herself. Based on letters and stories from prison, it became evident that neither Jessica nor Valerie felt any remorse or shame for their actions or the impact on Stacy's family. The pain and shock of Stacy's loved ones meant nothing to them. Throughout the trial, Jessica and Valerie even laughed and mocked the situation, expressing their disdain for the whole thing. Valerie's defense attorney described her as suffering from a severe personality disorder and having endured a traumatic upbringing, including an abusive father who had served prison time for assaulting her mother. By the age of 10, Valerie had developed an obsession with the vampire subculture and a morbid fascination with drinking human blood. In March 2008, Valerie, Jessica, and David all pleaded guilty to their crime. David was sentenced to 2 years in prison, while Jessica and Valerie received life sentences in maximum security prisons, with a minimum of 24 years before becoming eligible for parole. Valerie appealed her sentence, but her appeal was unanimously rejected. The judge expressed shock at their behavior during the trial, saying that they had had over a year in custody to reflect on the horrors of their crime, yet they showed no remorse and failed to appreciate the sanctity of human life. The judge also remarked that they seemed to enjoy violence. After the trial, Valerie, Jessica, and David were sent to separate prisons. Initially, they attempted to stay connected by exchanging letters through a fellow inmate, Catherine Burney, but their communication gradually dwindled. In 2009, Valerie was involved in a prison fight, injuring 3 officers who tried to intervene. In 2013, she made an unsuccessful attempt to escape, failing even to leave the premises. Jessica, meanwhile, had 20 minor offenses cleared in 2014 after authorities deemed them insignificant compared to the severity of the crime that led to her imprisonment. The cleared charges included 18 counts of riding public transportation without a ticket, 1 count of drinking in a vehicle, and 1 count of smoking in a prohibited area, offenses that the court categorized as trivial. Stacy's family continues to mourn her tragic loss, grappling with a profound sense of guilt for not being able to protect her. Years after Stacy's passing, her father shared with journalists the enduring pain of losing his daughter. He said that they thought about it every day and wondered if something could have been done differently. He expressed sorrow, saying that Stacy could have had a child by then, and he often imagined what that child might have looked like. He added that it was heartbreaking knowing they would never see her again. Stacy's older brother, who was just 2 years her senior, eventually moved back to Britain following her death. He explained that staying in the place where his sister's life ended was unbearable, calling her death utterly senseless. He reflected on the deep pain of realizing that Stacy had been close to returning to her family, only to now confront the devastating reality that she was gone forever. The haunting story of 2 individuals who took pleasure in ending a young girl's life remains difficult to comprehend. After a quarrel with her parents, Stacy sought solace in her older friends, who offered no support but instead dismissed her, saying she irritated them. One of these individuals, David, was described as timid and prone to panic attacks. At the time of the murder, he allegedly wandered aimlessly around the neighborhood instead of intervening to stop the crime. He had the opportunity, plenty of time, to call the police, a single act that might have saved Stacy's life. Many feel that David's punishment does not adequately reflect his role in the tragedy. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Thad Reynolds. On the morning of Monday, July 5, 2004, when it was still dark at the Frito-Lay distribution center, which was located in one of the suburbs of Georgia, USA, a courier was preparing to load his car with parcels to start his usual work shift. As he approached the offices, he noticed something unusual. An unfamiliar man was quickly moving across the parking lot. The man looked around warily. Typically, employees arrived much later, with only a few workaholics showing up early. Initially, the courier did not think much of it, until he became an unwitting witness to even more suspicious behavior. As soon as this unfamiliar man approached a mini-van parked inconspicuously, he took off his shirt and threw it in the trunk, after which he changed it while looking around. The stranger then got behind the wheel and drove away, oblivious to the courier watching him. Concerned by the man's behavior, the courier approached the spot where the car had been parked and noticed blood on the asphalt. Everything seemed increasingly suspicious. When the witness entered the office to see what was going on inside, he found the general manager of the distribution center, Thad Reynolds, unconscious on the floor in a pool of his own blood. Alarmed, the courier immediately called 911. Within minutes, an ambulance crew arrived at the office, but the community was shaken by this event. In the small suburb where many knew each other, such a tragic death seemed unthinkable. This news especially alarmed the parishioners of the local church, who knew Thad Reynolds well as his wife, Michelle. Thad was not only the general manager of the distribution center, but also a volunteer pastor at the Baptist church. The Reynolds seemed like a beautiful and loving couple who had 4 daughters and a happy, established life together. Thad was a devoted father and a devout Christian who dedicated his life to his family and helping others. Back in the 80s, Michelle and Thad were ordinary high school students who fell in love. Michelle was a cheerleader who became prom queen, and Thad was a popular, handsome football player with great expectations. It seemed like they was made for each other. They were often referred to as Ken and Barbie. Both were very religious, as were their families. They married in a Baptist church in 1987, right after graduation. The newlyweds started their careers, with Thad working and Michelle as an assistant administrator. They dreamed of a beautiful house, a video camera, and going on a cruise. These goals were achieved quite quickly. In 1992, they welcomed a daughter, which brought significant changes to their lives. At that moment, Michelle became a housewife, wanting to be a loving mother and wife. During this period, she delved into everything necessary to cope with the growing needs of the family. It seemed like everything was going well, but in 1993, a year after the birth of their daughter, Michelle admitted that she wanted a divorce. It seemed that she saw some kind of liberation in this. However, Thad viewed the situation as a real tragedy. During this time, he stopped attending church. As a pastor, Thad struggled with what to do in this situation, but he received strong support from his parishioners, who prayed for him. Even so, Thad and Michelle divorced, and Thad was heartbroken. He could not come to terms with the situation and was persistent in wanting to win back his beloved. At first, she did not agree, and he tried to build relationships with other women but could not forget Michelle. Thad did not give up, and finally, 2 years after the divorce, his efforts bore fruit. Thad thanked the parishioners of the church for their prayers that had been answered. Thad and Michelle remarried in 1997, in the same church. They built a new house near Thad's parents' residence, where they had 3 more daughters. Once again, the Reynolds family appeared to be a loving family. The divorce from a few years prior seemed like just a misunderstanding in a distant memory. During this period, Thad received a promotion at work and became a regional manager at the Frito-Lay distribution center. Thad and Michelle became a model for local families with good income, a nice house, and homeschooled children. Thad's faith grew stronger. He sincerely believed that his prayers were heard by God and was very grateful to the local community. They were sociable and formed a wide circle of acquaintances. Thad and Michelle developed particularly warm relationships with Harper, a volunteer church leader and volunteer family pastor at Hollywood Baptist, who also had a wife named Paige and 3 small daughters. All the members of the families got along well. Thad worked mainly remotely, while Michelle and Paige became best friends, accompanying each other everywhere. Their children were also very friendly. However, the idyllic friendship between the families began to change suddenly in 2004 when Paige noticed that her friend was starting to avoid her and making an effort to maintain distance in every possible way. Paige tried to find out what was going on and talked to Thad. He referenced family issues, which allegedly led to a test of Michelle's character. In fact, Michelle wanted Thad to break off her relationship with her husband, who was increasingly immersed in church affairs, distancing himself from her. However, she understood that he would resist this in every way possible. Additionally, a divorce would jeopardize the pastor's career, which he had long sought. An outlet for him was communication with his congregation. They regularly Thad him on the internet. In parallel, the men began to work together at the church, which made their meetings more frequent. The last of them occurred on July 4, 2004. The couples met again at the church, and after the service, they went to a local park to spend time together playing volleyball. Paige noticed that Michelle was more flirtatious with her husband that evening than usual. By the end of the joint vacation, the couples gathered their children and went home. She did even ask her husband not to communicate with Michelle. The next morning, on July 5, 2004, Thad got up early, which was normal for him. He arrived at work much earlier than the other employees, after which he would start his shift. After he walked inside, a burgundy minivan stopped in the parking lot near the offices. A man got out and entered the building. A few minutes later, Thad Reynolds was killed. Soon after, the county police received a call from the distribution center. A witness found a body outside of the offices. The deceased was found to have multiple stab wounds all over his body, including several defensive injuries on his hands. He had desperately tried to defend himself but was unable to resist the armed criminal. The witness, a courier, mentioned that he saw the probable attacker but did not get a good look at his face or the license plate number of the car he drove away in because it was very dark. However, he provided some valuable clues. Evidence found at the scene of the bloody massacre confirmed that the suspect and the person seen by the courier were the same. It soon became obvious that the attacker was injured. His blood was found near the doorway at the entrance to the office and near the car. According to investigators, there was nothing unusual about this, as attackers often cut themselves on the blade when using a knife. This provided detectives with several important clues. Firstly, it was clear that the attacker was an inexperienced criminal since a lot of evidence was left at the scene. Aside from the blood, they found a hunting knife, which became the presumed murder weapon, allowing them to track down its place of purchase. Secondly, in the parking lot next to the minivan, they found custom-made glasses, probably dropped by the criminal while he was changing clothes. Apparently, he was trying to escape from the crime scene as quickly as possible and didn't bother to look for them. Naturally, such an accessory could help in identifying the criminal since they had a custom prescription. Thad's family was notified of what had happened, and his wife was in Thad to identify the deceased. The information spread rapidly throughout the small town. Among the first to learn of the situation was Scott Harper, who immediately got together with his wife and went to support Michelle during this difficult time. Imagine Paige's surprise when she saw that there were no signs of panic or tears of frustration from Michelle, which were typically expected from a grieving widow. Instead, she appeared distant and a bit embarrassed. Thad's loved ones also immediately noticed this strange behavior. Law enforcement officers began working at the crime scene from the first moments. The forensic examination quickly indicated that this attack could not have been random in nature. The only thing that seemed clear was that it had a personal motive. However, the money from the cash register remained untouched. Nothing was taken from Thad, not even his wallet, car keys, or mobile phone, all of which were left in their place. This means the stranger came to the office solely to commit murder. Additionally, the choice of weapon further supports these assumptions, as cruelty and the use of a knife imply close contact. It is likely that the criminal had his victim and had a personal motive for such a brutal attack. On the evening of the same day, news channels reported that local residents should be aware of a possible threat. The police sought information and attempted to find witnesses who could provide valuable clues. The local community supported several appeals to the police station, but nothing new emerged from the collected evidence. From the outset, detectives paid particular attention to Scott, who was close to the victims like no one else. Yet, none of the community members could believe Scott was capable of such an act, especially given that the relationships between the families seemed very friendly, resembling a model friendship free of hatred or malice. However, the evidence all pointed toward him. He drove a burgundy minivan, which was identical to the killer's vehicle, according to the main witness. Scott was promptly asked to come to the station and provide a statement. The reasons to pay attention to Scott turned out to be more than sufficient. It was revealed that another witness, who worked part-time installing, repairing telephone lines, had accidentally overheard a conversation between Scott and a woman, clearly not his wife, weeks before the crime. In that conversation, Scott even called her by name, Michelle. They flirted so openly that it was reminiscent of young lovers. Furthermore, Scott wore custom-made glasses, as everyone knew he had severe vision problems, making the accessory significant in identifying the criminal. They clearly had a motive to get rid of Thad, who was an obstacle to their happiness. Gradually, Scott Harper's wife began to notice unusual moments in his behavior. When reasonable suspicions arose, she became even more attentive. Firstly, Paige could not find her husband's glasses, which he always wore. Secondly, there were some bruises and scratches under his eyes from the glasses. In addition, there were bandages on his index and middle fingers, which he attributed to an injury received in the gym. The only thing missing was material evidence confirming Scott's involvement. The detectives expect Thad to find bloody clothes belonging to the killer, but it was all in vain. The search of Harper's house yielded no results. On Wednesday, July 7th, Scott was being interrogated at the police station. He attributed his injured hand to an accident at the gym, where he had crushed his fingers. Scott denied having had an affair with Michelle, also stated that he had lost his glasses and could not provide them to the detectives despite all persistent requests. He allegedly did not even have a doctor's prescription for their manufacture. Paige began to grow suspicious of her husband, but he stubbornly remained silent. According to Paige, he had been behaving strangely since Monday morning. Despite a whole list of circumstantial evidence, Scott was released from the police station. Naturally, this did not mean that the investigators took him at his word. It just took time to obtain warrants and gather more incriminating evidence. There were more inconsistencies. In particular, on the morning of the murder, he had sent Michelle a message in which he asked her to stop him if there was any doubt. She ordered him to act. These words sounded suspicious. It was believed that he was coordinating with his mistress. The detectives were in no hurry to bring Michelle in for questioning so as not to traumatize or scare her off. First, they wanted Thad to gather even more information, which led the detectives to Scott's workplace. The primary task was to check his computer. However, the correspondence had been deleted. Fortunately, a significant part of it was easily restored, which became a valuable source of information. The records showed that most of the messages from Scott were sent to Michelle Reynolds. He used his work computer to hide the correspondence from his wife. It all started as a routine discussion concerning the church youth group, but later the communication became increasingly personal. About a month before Thad's death, they began exchanging intimate letters regularly. They entered into a romantic relationship and planned to be together. Scott intended to leave his wife and move Michelle to Portland. While there were many ambiguous texts, there were no specific indications of malicious plans, making the situation complicated. On the day when Paige noticed that Michelle was somehow avoiding her, she was actually with Scott. This occurred during a trip related to church activities, but it did not prevent them from having sinful thoughts. The content of the letters revealed that Michelle desperately wants to break up with her husband, but Thad denied the very possibility of divorce. He was ready to do anything to keep his beautiful wife close to him, but it cost him his life. Detectives believe that, against this backdrop, Michelle realized that there was only one way to get out of this relationship: her husband's death. She did not want to shed blood with her own hands, so she sought the help of her lover. Clearly, both experienced intense feelings for each other. In search of evidence, investigators checked Scott's browser history. It turned out that he was looking for information suggesting that he wanted Thad not only to get rid of his mistress's husband but also to remain unpunished. The police eventually managed to uncover one of the key emails in which they planned the attack, intending to enter through the window when there would be fewer patrols on the streets, thereby increasing the chances of going unnoticed. Michelle played an active role in this plan, coordinating the actions when Thad left for work early on Monday morning. She immediately called her lover to order the attack. Even despite the veiled phrases and coded messages, it was obvious that early in the morning of July 5, 2004, the tragic was meant to happen. By this point, the police had gathered enough damning evidence against Michelle and Scott. The first to be ours Thad was Scott Harper, who was charged with first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. Detectives hoped that he would inevitably turn on Michelle, but instead, his feelings appeared to be stronger than they expect, as he exercised his right to remain silent immediately after the arrest and refused to cooperate. However, Scott's confirmation was not necessary, as his work computer provided enough circumstantial evidence to also charge Michelle. She was arrested the same day following Scott's arrest. The detectives detained her while she was leaving her lawyer's office in the city center. She immediately refused to speak, citing her rights. When the parishioners of the church where Thad served found out that his wife and his best friend had conspired against him, everyone was shocked. They all remembered how Thad had asked everyone to pray for his wife during his life and had wished for her return after the divorce, completely unaware of the betrayal that had taken place. This could end in a bloody massacre at the hands of those closest to him. Sheath of a hunting knife was found right in Thad's office, led them to track it down to the moment of purchase in the store. Judging by the recordings from the surveillance cameras, it was Scott bought it, but now the murder weapon was missing. It was believed that the killer managed to dispose of it. Crime scene investigation results are available. The drops of blood at the crime scene turned out to be Scott's blood. Suddenly, the situation changed on July 13 when one of Scott's colleagues from the medical center where he worked contacted Thad the police station. One of the IT department employees, who was concerned about Thad Reynolds' fate, decided to conduct his own investigation. He knew the layout of the buildings and the places where something could be carefully hidden. The object was small, and he immediately thought it was worth checking the niches under the floor through which communications and wires were laid to the office. Naturally, Scott knew about them, as he had worked in this department. To his surprise, the colleague found both the knife and bloody clothing, which he immediately reported to the police. On November 17, 2004, the preliminary stage of the hearings began, during which the order of the criminals' trials was evaluated. It was obvious that Michelle had a much better chance of avoiding imprisonment, as there was very weak evidence against her. All of it was indirect. In contrast, the evidence against Scott looked much more compelling, including the murder weapon and the bloody knife. The prosecutor believed that Scott had no chance of going unpunished, while new valuable details could come to light during the trial of the criminals. The police also found video recordings from the stores that Scott had visited Thad, located a salesperson who remembered the man who had bought the hunting knife. A prescription from Scott's eye doctor also appeared at the crime scene. As expected, it matched the glasses found there. At the November hearing, the district attorney announced that he would seek the death penalty for both defendants. This was a clever move, as there was nothing significant against Michelle so far. The authorities hoped that Scott would be able to rectify this situation, realizing that he had nothing left to lose. It was assumed that the man would be offered a deal, which would be his only chance to avoid capital punishment. They believed that he was weak in spirit, otherwise, he would not have succumbed to the charms of Michelle, a seductress and manipulator. However, they were wrong. Scott did not give in, even under pressure from his lawyer, who believed that this was the only way to save his life. Even behind prison bars, Scott and Michelle continued to correspond. Michelle used excerpts from the Bible, highlighting certain words, while Scott composed real sentences that law enforcement officers could read. But these notes could not convince the jury, which would have been difficult. They continued to play their spy game, and they had plenty of time. Cases involving capital punishment traditionally turn into lengthy legal maneuvering on the part of the lawyers. All this dragged on for months and even years. Scott turned out to be a very persistent man and held out until the fall of 2008. After 4 years spent in prison, he finally agreed to cooperate with the police. However, even now, concerns about his mistress occupied the main place in his thoughts. Scott agreed to confess in exchange for a life sentence and also demanded that the death penalty never be used against Michelle. The deal was approved on October 1, 2008. Scott admitted his guilt. According to him, the day before the attack, Michelle had once again told him that they could not be together while Thad was alive. She had been turning her lover, Scott, against her husband for a long time, and in parallel, she was poisoning Thad with more harmful food that would kill him faster. Pressure was the last drop. Right after that, Scott went to a camping equipment store where he bought a hunting knife. That same day, he had to deal with Thad, who usually stayed in the office later than everyone else. Scott and Michelle even went to a restaurant together, where he confessed to his failure, and then they planned the attack for the next morning. They kissed in the parking lot of the car like teenagers. When Scott arrived at Thad's office with a knife in his hands, he told Thad, "I want the same as you," and then attacked his friend. Interestingly, until this point, Michelle had never provided any testimony. By exercising her right to remain silent, her statements could be interpreted from different angles, making the trial against her a rather risky endeavor. In particular, her correspondence never directly addressed their intentions. Using encryption and veiled propositions, it was almost impossible to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. During her 6 years in prison, Michelle Reynolds changed significantly and became unrecognizable. When she spoke to the police, however, her responses were still veiled offers. Michelle avoided direct answers, stating that she felt guilty because she had an affair that led to her husband's death. Of course, this did not satisfy Thad's mother, who simply wanted Thad to know why he had to die. Michelle had no answer. Michelle eventually pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 20 years in prison in January 2010. Richard Scott Harper pleaded guilty to murder and received a life sentence without parole. This tragedy left a bloody mark not only on the lives of 2 families but also on the congregation. The death of the pastor, who was so cruelly murdered at the behest of his wife, was one of the most disturbing and painful events for them. Now, regarding the repose of Thad's soul, this situation caused mixed feelings. Everyone remembered how they had prayed for the Reynolds to be together, but now they could not discern whether this was divine providence or a devilish joke. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Fidel Lopez. This is the content of a chaotic call in the middle of the night. What's wrong with you? Hello, listen, you gotta help me. My girlfriend is in the bathroom, she can't get enough air. I mean, oh my God, she's gonna die. Come on, I can barely understand you. Calm down. Oh my God, I know what happened. There's blood on the floor, I don't know, she's not breathing. I mean, she's gonna die. Come on, what's the address? I don't know, I was just smoking my cigarette. Man, I'm just smoking my cigarette, and then this happened. Damn it, Maria. Come on, please, I need you to tell me an address so we can assist you. Sir, I need an address so we can help you. In the early hours of Sunday morning, Fidel Lopez, 24, lit a cigarette inside his new apartment. Just behind the broken sliding glass door lay his 31-year-old girlfriend, Maria Lizette Namath, in a pool of her own blood, either dead or dying. He finished his cigarette and gathered the courage to call 911. The operator, understanding the situation and the address, quickly dispatched officers. The call was recorded at 3:39 a.m. on Sunday, September 20th, 2015. The specialists witnessed a horror show. According to detective investigator Christopher Piper, when the officers entered Lopez's apartment, they found Lopez standing next to Maria's body. He called for help, and the doctors immediately rushed to Maria lying in the pool of blood. The police noted that the dressing room was also splattered with blood. They observed extensive damage to the walls and doors throughout the apartment. Maria showed no signs of life and was pronounced dead at 4:02 a.m. Clear signs of a struggle and a near certainty that violent acts had taken place led to the apartment being declared a crime scene, which was placed under guard. Lopez was also detained pending the arrival of investigators. Piper reported that when he arrived at the crime scene, he briefly spoke with one of the officers and conducted a preliminary search of the nearly empty apartment. A Sunrise police officer informed the detective about Maria and Fidel. They had moved into the apartment less than a week ago. Maria, a native of Peru, was a rental manager for an apartment complex, while Fidel worked as a mechanic at a truck stop. They had begun dating about a year and 2 months prior after meeting at a club. Maria had recently separated from her husband after 8 years of marriage, and Fidel lived with his mother. They decided to live together and moved into an apartment in Terrace, Sunrise. It was clear from the apartment that Maria and Fidel had just moved in, were starting their life together almost from scratch. There was no full set of furniture, boxes were used as tables. On the night of the incident, the apartment was bare, making the dents and holes in the walls immediately noticeable. A broken glass door, blood virtually everywhere. In Detective Piper's report, it states that Maria's naked body was lying on the bathroom floor. In addition to the blood on the floor, there were bloody marks on the walls in the hallway, on the closet and bathroom doors, as well as many other surfaces. Inside the closet were pieces that looked like bloody human flesh. Initially, it was assumed that Maria had tried to terminate a pregnancy, but as forensic experts later discovered, it was the intestines that Fidel had torn out of his girlfriend during rough intimate. Detective Piper introduced Lopez to the police officers, who took him to the Sunrise police station at 7:40 a.m., where he was informed of his Miranda rights and placed in an interrogation room. Fidel then signed a waiver of these rights, claiming that although he didn't understand English, if it were read aloud to him, he would comprehend it. Defense attorneys later would unsuccessfully argue that since Fidel was not a native English speaker, he could not fully understand the Miranda rules. Miranda rights are a legal requirement in the United States, mandating that detainees be informed of their rights. The law enforcement officer who detains them must receive a positive response to the question of whether the detainee understands what has been said. Fidel Lopez, a native of Havana, Cuba, moved to the United States at the age of 16, attended high school, but dropped out in the 10th grade. Fidel recounted to the investigator his relationship with Maria, how it began, and how it developed up to that Saturday. On that day, he left work a couple of hours early and met Maria, who had also left home early. Maria cooked dinner for them, consisting of chicken, beans, and rice. After dinner, they visited Fidel's mother in Miami, then returned to their apartment, where they each had a glass of margarita, splitting a third drink. Later, they went to a liquor store and purchased a bottle of tequila. By about 10 p.m., they were home. According to Fidel, Maria was already tipsy from the margarita. At home, they continued to drink, placing 2 cardboard boxes on the floor since they didn't have a table, put their glasses and snacks on the boxes while listening to music. As the tequila took effect, Maria asked Fidel to fulfill some of her intimate fantasies. Much of what Fidel claimed was cruel and dangerous, but since he was her partner, he tried to comply with her requests. However, his memories from that night were fuzzy. He was drunk. As they engaged in various activities, Maria mentioned that she was feeling sick and asked him to leave the bathroom. Fidel stepped outside and found himself outside, smoking a cigarette. He doesn't remember if he broke down the bathroom door or if it was already broken, but it is most likely that he did it since Maria wasn't strong enough. He only remembers seeing broken glass on the floor and does not recall more details about how he broke it and why. He also remembers that he went to the bathroom and that Maria was somehow breathing intermittently at that time. Fidel thought that perhaps she was hurting herself, but he did not hear the characteristic sounds associated with that. When the detectives asked about the quarrel that occurred that night, Fidel replied that there were no quarrels, they were just drinking and listening to music. The detectives continued to probe and posed leading questions. Lopez was asked if he felt offended when his girlfriend spoke dismissively about his masculine qualities. He replied that he was not upset, just felt a little stupid. The next question from the investigators was whether there had been any damage to the apartment before they moved in. Fidel responded that everything was fine in the apartment. However, since the detectives were focused on the specifics of when and why things happened, they asked what he might have done in those moments when he was angry. During further interrogation, it appeared that Fidel might have felt angry about Maria's ex-husband, whom she had mentioned during their intimate, but he couldn't recall exactly what was said. The detectives continued the interrogation in the form of a normal conversation, maintaining a neutral tone without accusations. When discussing the moment Fidel realized that Maria had died, it was evident that he was overcome with emotion. He then began to explain that he tried to perform artificial respiration on Maria, despite not knowing how to do it properly. She was lying with her eyes open but was not moving, and he lay next to her on the floor, trying to bring her back to life while screaming for help, hoping someone would come. I tried to give her artificial respiration, but I didn't even know how to do it. She wasn't breathing at all, she had her eyes open but wasn't moving. I carried her in my arms and waited for the police. The police were interested to know whether Fidel had ever physically assaulted Maria before or used force against her, but he denied any physical violence during the interrogation. Then he was asked an important question: does that mean you admit that everything that happened in this apartment was destroyed and broken by you? He confirmed this statement, insisting that he did not hurt Maria and continually asked if she was comfortable. Even when he noticed that she was bleeding, she said that she was not in pain. The officers informed Fidel that Maria had been examined by a forensic expert, who indicated that her injuries were very serious, involving internal bleeding, damage to internal organs, and multiple ruptures. When the police suggested that a brutal abuse had occurred, Fidel began to deny everything. He insisted he had done everything Maria asked him to do. They explained to him that Maria had serious internal injuries and that the pain she was experiencing would have been unbearable. Fidel, however, maintained that he had acted with her consent. The detectives attempted to persuade him that someone who truly loves another person could never cause such harm. They stated Maria was seriously injured. They began to reproach him for failing to show her due attention. There's blood everywhere. Fidel appeared confused and was then told he needed to confess to what happened, particularly since the police had learned much more than what he had disclosed. They argued that if he loved Maria, she deserved an honest conclusion to this story. Fidel again agreed with these conclusions. Fidel loved this girl, of course. He wouldn't have done anything to hurt her, but he did. After a moment of silence, Fidel began to speak rapidly and interrupted himself. He revealed that Maria had mentioned wanting to go to Peru to visit her mother and would be gone for a while, which meant Fidel could not use her car to travel to and from work. This prompted an argument, though he could not recall how they ended up in the closet. They made up, had intimate, and at one point Maria called out the name of her ex-husband. This happened twice. Then Fidel described a series of attacks on Maria using both his body and various objects around the house, shoving them into her crotch. After his rage, Lopez returned to the closet where his girlfriend lay unconscious and continued to insert various foreign objects into her vagina and anus, including a beer bottle, a hair straightener, both fists, and his arm up to his elbow. Fidel also admitted to pulling internal tissue out of Nemeth's body while she was unconscious. He then took her naked body into the bathroom and attempted to revive her by splashing water in her face, but she did not wake up. He then washed the blood off his hands and went to the porch outside their apartment to smoke a cigarette. When Lopez returned inside to try to clean up the crime scene and conceal Nemeth's dislodged intestines, he realized she was no longer breathing. He began running around the rooms, smashing and breaking everything in sight. Afterward, he stopped to exhale, have a smoke, took off the clothes he was wearing, washed himself, put on fresh clothing without getting dirty, and called 911. Fidel confessed to the detectives that he committed the crime because, during their intimacy, at the height of pleasure, Maria shouted out another name. He expressed regret for what he did, saying he didn't want to kill her, but he knew he killed her. He took her life. He won't even be able to see her again. While the interrogation was ongoing, experts were collecting evidence at the crime scene and examining Maria's mutilated body. Police officers interviewed neighbors, many of whom noted hearing screams and sounds of conflict. Fidel Lopez was arrested and charged with murdering his girlfriend, Maria Nemeth. A long, dreadful night dragged on until midday before Fidel was shackled and transferred to the Aburrá County Jail, a man with no criminal record other than a 2014 arrest for intoxicated hooliganism. He was jailed in a cell recognized as a murderer, a monster who deserved to be caged. Perhaps it was the alcohol that drove him to madness. Perhaps jealousy turned him into someone he never imagined he could become. In the early stages of the trial, Fidel's lawyers attempted to challenge his entire interrogation and confession, arguing that his limited knowledge of English meant he could not understand his Miranda rights or request the presence of a lawyer from the moment of his arrest, as well as his right not to answer certain questions at his discretion. However, the judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence on the video recording showing that Fidel not only had a functional command of English but also fully understood what he was being asked. On July 14, 2017, after a lengthy stay in the Broward County Jail, Fidel agreed to a plea deal. On August 3, 2017, Fidel Lopez accepted charges of first-degree murder, abuse, assault, and was sentenced to life in prison. The terms of the plea deal prohibit him from appealing the sentence and ensure that he will never be eligible for parole. The peace of the families of Fidel Lopez and Maria Nemeth was shattered that fateful night. No one can undo the monstrous events that occurred. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Risa Trexler. Losing a loved one is terrifying, especially when the person is young. It is even worse to be under unfounded suspicion. Everyone around you, including your own mother, begins to suspect that the weapon of the crime was in your hands. Risa Trexler was born on October 11, 1968, in the small town of Salisbury, North Carolina, USA, with a population of about 30,000 people. She was the eldest child in the family, and after 2 years, she had a sister named Jody. Risa was described as a smart and kind girl with a heart of gold who was always ready to lend a helping hand to those in need. She was positive and cheerful. It was no surprise that her younger sister looked up to her. This admiration was quite logical since they even shared a room in the family house. Naturally, there were occasional misunderstandings and quarrels typical for girls of the same age, but overall, the strong connection they shared was enviable. On June 15, 1984, 15-year-old Risa and her 13-year-old sister Jody decided to invite friends over to celebrate the beginning of their school holidays. Among their guests were 2 friends, who lived nearby. When the teenagers gathered at Risa's house, they made sandwiches, snacked, listened to music, watched TV, and chatted. Around 3 p.m., the guests went home. Risa decided to visit her grandparents who lived nearby. They were all very friendly, and the houses were closely situated. Risa arrived at the home of her grandparents, but found that no one was there. At that moment, her grandfather had gone to the supermarket to buy groceries, and her grandmother had gone to the hairdresser. This did not upset Risa. She had a key to the house and could let herself in. She went inside and began to watch TV. Jody did not accompany her older sister but stayed at home to finish her tasks. After about 20 minutes, Jody was about to go to her grandparents' house but immediately noticed that her grandparents' car was not there and decided to return home. She assumed that everyone had gone about their business and that there was nothing to do there. Later, around 5 p.m., the grandpa returned home first, while Grandma was delayed at the beauty salon and was expected to arrive shortly. As soon as he entered the house, he saw signs of a struggle. things were scattered around, and suspected that a robbery might have occurred. However, what he found in the room was far more terrifying and caused him to scream. Jody heard her grandfather's scream from the neighboring house, recognized his voice, and ran over to his home. She tried to understand what was happening, but her grandfather did not let her in. A commotion ensued as neighbors and relatives gathered. Finally, Jody managed to break into the house, where she found a robe lying on the floor in the guest bedroom. It was covered with a blanket to prevent anyone from seeing the horrifying sight. Risa was naked, with only a bracelet, a watch, and a ring on her body. She had suffered several stab wounds to her upper chest and neck. When the police arrived, they discovered signs of a break-in, but nothing valuable appeared to have been stolen. The fact that the perpetrator did not intend to rob was indicated by the victim still wearing her jewelry. The criminal's intentions were clearly much more sinister. Relatives who lived nearby arrived at the family home and were shocked by the horrific bloody sight. They were all concerned with only one question: what happened to Risa? Numerous theories emerged: a maniac on the loose. The body of Risa was sent for a forensic examination in North Carolina. It was revealed that she had received 18 stab wounds, primarily to the upper body. Additionally, clear signs of strangulation were found on her neck. A steak knife was likely used in the attack. The violence was so extreme that the blade had broken off and remained lodged in Risa's shoulder. The injuries were severe, with one stab wound nearly severing her spinal cord. This meant that even if she had survived, she would likely have been paralyzed for the rest of her life. Numerous defensive wounds indicated that the victim had fought back vigorously. Given that the body was found naked, abuse assault was suspected, and this suspicion was confirmed when male biological fluids were found on her body, which were collected for examination. The criminal was careless, as DNA samples, specifically skin from the killer obtained during the struggle, were found on Risa's neck, along with several hairs. Unfortunately, there were no hair follicles on these samples that would allow for full identification. However, the forensic scientist managed to establish that the dark, coarse hairs belonged to an African-American man. At that time, there was no fully developed technology for compiling a DNA profile, so while the materials were valuable, they were not needed and were simply sent to an archive for safekeeping. Jody turned out to be one of the few people who had seen Risa alive before her death. This was confirmed by familiar boys who left the house just before Risa went to her grandparents' home. Jody missed her sister, eventually decided to go to her grandparents' house as well. When she approached the house, she realized that there were no cars belonging to her relatives, which meant they had both left. She did not check if her sister was there. The house seemed empty, and it was quiet, so Jody immediately headed back home. She assumed that her sister had either left with their grandparents or had gone home herself, and that they had simply missed each other on the way. Jody later heard her grandfather scream. When she looked out from her bedroom window, she saw her grandfather crying and screaming, clenching his fists in horror. Jody immediately ran to her grandfather's house to understand what was happening. No one from Risa's immediate circle could remember any dark-skinned acquaintances capable of such brutality. However, when questioning local residents, it was possible to indirectly confirm the presence of a suspicious African American near the crime scene. 9 people reported similar stories, stating that after the alleged murder, a middle-aged black man ran through the area, appearing scared. No one raised the alarm because they did not hear the girl's screams. He managed to commit the abuse without making noise. While there were some discrepancies in the neighbors' descriptions of the stranger, overall, the account seemed credible. Despite the clear evidence indicating that Risa was attacked by an African American, detectives began searching for suspects without targeting anyone specific at first. After the attack occurred, Jody became a suspect despite the absurdity of such speculation. It was evident that a man was behind this crime. The local community was shocked by Risa's murder, which led to the spread of disturbing rumors. Information surfaced suggesting that Jody could be the criminal, and these rumors became firmly established, while the detectives did little to refute them. Although Jody was not actually a suspect, the growing suspicion from the public weighed heavily on her. During the funeral for Risa, the rumors about Jody intensified, many believed she was too insensitive for such a tragic event. From that moment on, even investigators began to pay more attention to her. Despite her young age of 13, investigators interrogated Jodi without her parents present. The girl was pressured repeatedly and was asked why she had killed her sister. Jodi, in tears, protested and insisted that she could never do such a thing to the person she loved more than anyone in the world. Nevertheless, DNA samples were taken from her. Amid the pressure from law enforcement, even Jodi's mother began to doubt her daughter's innocence. Gradually, her loved ones began to turn away from her, which was a devastating blow during such a difficult time. The police were unable to find any leads against the other suspects on the list. The detectives could not connect the bloody massacre to anyone. Consequently, the FBI was brought in to assist with the investigation. After creating a psychological profile, a suspect was identified, but contrary to expectations, the profile did not match actual investigative findings. At this time, it was believed that the suspect was a white man between the ages of 18 and 24 who must have known his victim. The man probably felt remorse after the crime and searched for a way out of the situation, indicating he was emotionally unstable. 5 months passed since the brutal murder. The investigation reached a dead end. Finally, Jodi's grandfather, Walt Monroe, spoke publicly against the local police, stating that the authorities were not making enough efforts to solve his granddaughter's murder. Months turned into years, and those affected were tormented by uncertainty as they desperately sought to uncover the criminal's identity. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain. During this time, Jodi suffered the most. Even 4 years later, rumors of her involvement in her sister's murder persisted and worsened. These rumors spread to social media, infiltrated the media, and even led to the creation of dedicated groups that vilified her as the killer. Gradually, the public's interest waned, and the case of Reisa Trexler ended up archived among unsolved crimes. It wasn't until 2018, 34 years after her sister's murder, that Jodi appeared on a television show to prove her innocence. As an adult, she continued to suffer the consequences of baseless rumors. In an effort to clear her name, she requested to take a polygraph test. Shockingly, it turned out that the police had never conducted one, even though Jodi had persistently asked for it to be done. By this time, Jodi was already a married woman. However, she still remembered well the mutilated body of her sister covered in blood. Jodi, even more than the rest of the family, wanted to find the killer. Not only did the criminal kill her beloved sister, but Jodi was also shocked when all her loved ones began to turn away from her. It all started with the condemnation from strangers, gradual pressure, and attacks grew into something more. Her mother even to her, saying that she wanted to know the truth and would not be angry. This ultimately destroyed Jodi, and she even had moments when she didn't want to live. According to her, all these accusations were absurd and traumatic. To prove her innocence once and for all, Jodi went on the Dr. Phil show and passed a lie detector test to prove her innocence. She spoke in detail about her memories of that fateful day. According to her, when she ran up to the house, her grandfather did not let her inside until the last moment. Jodi believed something terrible had happened to her grandmother. When she finally entered her grandparents' house, she saw Reisa's robe and a sheet, which by that time was completely soaked in blood. She didn't know who did it, but she thought her grandfather had covered his granddaughter's body to shield others from the horror. Jodi continued to express her bewilderment, stating that she had no idea why everyone was against her. She thought it was either malicious intent or the negligence and suspicion of law enforcement officers. She still didn't understand why the police showed such an interest in a 13-year-old girl. Jodi had provided all possible DNA samples and was questioned more than any other suspects, even more than the rest of the family after the murder. Some of her friends immediately turned away from her and refused to communicate. The situation worsened as rumors spread. Jodi returned from school almost every day in tears, desperately wishing for the criminal to be found as soon as possible. Little did she suspect that she would suffer for more than a decade amidst this overwhelming pressure. By the time she reached high school, Jodi began to experience behavioral problems. She even ended up in a rehabilitation center at the age of 15 because she abused alcohol and marijuana. This behavior helped her escape and distract herself from the problematic attitudes surrounding her. Allegedly, even if she did not kill her sister, she must have known much more than she actually told the detectives because she was nearby at the time of the crime. The polygraph confirmed that Jody was telling the truth when she answered that she did not kill her sister, and there is absolutely no other information about the massacre. Interestingly, Jody's desire to speak out after so many years triggered a new wave of interest in the murder of Risa Trexler. In November 2018, a young detective named Travis Schulenberger decided to revisit the case files and re-examine the evidence from 34 years ago. He was inspired by Jody's courage in deciding to take a polygraph test live on the program. When Travis's efforts became known to Jody's family, they even thanked him personally, as she was still haunted by the thought that Risa's murder remained unpunished. It was a great success that all the evidence collected in the case remained intact. Finally, on December 3, 2019, the Salisbury Police Department announced that they had information regarding the previously unsolved case. A press conference was held with the participation of the Trexler family. The event began with the announcement that Jody was completely acquitted. The police had identified the murderer of Risa. It turned out to be a dark-skinned man from the past, Curtis Blair. According to Travis, Salisbury police detectives had done a commendable job investigating the unsolved case. They conducted repeated interrogations, spoke to everyone involved in the initial investigation, and gathered statements about a black man who had been seen running through the area shortly after the murder. They analyzed all the objects and evidence collected during the search for the criminal and began collaboration with forensic laboratories. Gradually, the authorities recognized the need to use genetic genealogy, a technique that had emerged a few years prior to the re-investigation of this crime, proving itself to be an advanced and highly effective technology. The resulting profile was compiled using publicly available databases, which included not only those associated exclusively with law enforcement but also independent databases where individuals could voluntarily contribute their DNA profiles. Authorities once again turned to the public for new information, particularly to learn more about the alleged killer. Simultaneously, tests were conducted in the laboratory, and a publication about the case of Risa Trexler appeared. Several concerned individuals contacted the police station, but they were unable to provide any valuable information, as everything was already known. As law enforcement agencies in the United States increasingly utilize genetic genealogy to find criminals, the public has raised more questions. Many expressed concern that such practices could be considered violations of privacy. Most databases where individuals can submit DNA samples for analysis and database replenishment cooperate openly with the police. Against this backdrop, many do not agree with the practices of such companies. To maintain privacy, the name of the criminal was initially kept secret. It is difficult to convey in words how similar Jody lacked care at that time. Despite identifying the criminal and successfully passing a polygraph test, she still felt pressure, and some people continued not to believe her. However, the press conference, during which the district attorney firmly stated that none of Trexler family members were the killers, provided some reassurance. Before the case of Risa Trexler was reopened, about 100 potential suspects had been identified. To reconstruct the profile of the killer, biological samples collected from the deceased's body were uploaded to a publicly available genetic database. Specialists from a company conducted reverse engineering of the genealogical tree of the suspect, which allowed them to calculate several probable killers. This group was eventually narrowed down to one individual. The Parabon Nanolabs company created his profile using innovative genealogical analysis techniques, leading to the identification of a criminal who had committed another violent crime and served time in the early 2000s. However, he died of heart failure in 2007 in California. Curtis's grave is located in the Memorial Park Cemetery in Salisbury. The only evidence Blair left at the scene was a small knife that was confiscated by investigators. They managed to obtain it and send it to the crime lab. It was believed that the criminal took the second weapon from the execution site. In June 2019, investigators exhumed his body, collecting materials for DNA examination in comparison with existing criminal profiles. By August 6, 2019, it was found that Curtis Blair's DNA profile was almost 100% consistent with the killer's profile, eliminating the risk of error. The probability of a random match was too low to doubt. The evidence was convincing enough to conclude that the case was finally solved. Consequently, the case was closed, leaving the Trexler family with mixed feelings. They understood that the individual who had harmed Risa was no longer a threat and society could feel secure. On the other hand, they wondered if they would ever understand why he had committed such a terrible act. Risa's killer lived 2 hours away from Trexler House and worked in Frito-Lay factory just 2 blocks from the site of the attack. His name was Curtis Blair, a black man who was 40 years old at the time of the murder. He matched the initial descriptions provided by witnesses. He was large and strong. Born in San Diego County, California, little is known about his life. However, rumors suggest that his father was very cruel, leading to an extremely challenging upbringing. As a young man, he decided to relocate and began a journey through several states in search of a better life. At the time of the brutal crime, he already had a criminal history that included a significant prison term for assault with a deadly weapon. The stabbing incident began as the culmination of a robbery involving 2 men. For this crime, Curtis was sentenced to a long prison term. After he was released, he moved to a new place 2 years prior to the attack on Risa. During this time, he concealed his dark nature for a while. He hid from his bloody past in San Diego and then made a fatal decision to move to North Shaver. The Risa Trexler case, after more than 35 years in the dark, finally found light thanks to Jody's persistence and significant advances in investigative technology. The identification of Curtis Blair as the killer not only completely exonerated Jody, who had endured the pain of losing her sister and unjust suspicion for decades, but also brought a measure of justice to the Trexler family. Although Blair passed away and could not face trial, the revelation of the truth still provided a precious consolation, closing a painful chapter in Salisbury's history. For Jody, this journey was not only a fight to prove her innocence but also an affirmation of her undying love for her sister, a feeling that transcended both time and injustice. However, the question of why still lingers in the minds of those left behind. What drove Blair, a person who once lived right in the heart of the community, to so cruelly attack an innocent young girl like Risa? His true motives will likely remain a mystery, buried with him in a grave in Salisbury Cemetery. Above all, this case is a testament to the power of science and the human determination to find the truth, no matter how long it takes. For the Trexler family and the Salisbury community, the resolution of the case is not just the end of a nightmare but the beginning of a healing process, a journey they have long awaited to begin. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Kathleen Lorek. Kathleen Lorek was born on August 9, 1953, in New Mexico, USA, into a large and loving family. She had 2 sisters, Loretta and Serena, as well as 3 brothers, William, Leo, and Joseph. In the 1970s, her family relocated to California. It was there that Kathleen met Jeffrey Line, and their relationship quickly blossomed. At the age of 23, Kathleen married Jeffrey, and shortly afterward, they welcomed their first child, Mike. Over the following years, they had 2 more children, Eric, born in December 1980, and Marissa, born in August 1983. However, as their family grew, Kathleen and Jeffrey's relationship began to deteriorate. After 20 years of marriage, they divorced in 1997. The divorce was challenging, but Kathleen was granted primary custody of the children. While Jeffrey retained visitation rights and was required to pay child support, Kathleen focused on rebuilding her life. During this difficult time, she regained her zest for life. She became more social, remained in California, and as her children grew up and moved out, she fully embraced her independence. Around this period, Kathleen secured a position as an assistant to the general director at a tech company. Her career is progressing steadily, and she seems to be heading toward a promising future. During her time at work, Kathleen met Johannes Lorek, the son of one of her colleagues and a native of Austria. They quickly bonded and began dating. Despite the challenges posed by Johannes frequently traveling back to Austria, the two maximized their time together. Whether enjoying romantic dinners or taking trips to the mountains, they made efforts to strengthen their relationship. In early 2003, during one of their trips to the Swiss Alps, Johannes proposed to Kathleen. However, there was a significant challenge. Johannes planned to move back to Austria permanently. Kathleen accepted his proposal and appeared ready to join him in Europe. They were married in the United States, but Kathleen still had many ongoing projects to complete before she could reunite with Johannes and begin their life together in Austria. Kathleen worked as an executive assistant to the company director, a role she performed with dedication and reliability. She was highly regarded by management and colleagues alike for her professionalism. The company was located near the Contra Costa Canal Trail, a popular spot in the Concord area where locals often jogged or biked. Kathleen frequently took walks along the trail during her lunch break. She kept a pair of sneakers at work just for these walks, and whether she went alone or with a colleague, it became part of her daily routine. Many of her colleagues also enjoyed using the trail during breaks. During her lunch break, which typically lasted about an hour, Kathleen not only had time to eat and rest but also to speak with her husband, Johannes. They often called each other multiple times a day, eagerly anticipating the moment they could reunite. 2 months after their wedding, during a normal workday, Kathleen left for her usual lunch break. On Tuesday, May 13, 2003, at 12:40 p.m., she decided to take a walk along the nearby trail to get some fresh air and talk to Johannes. Co-workers saw Kathleen leave the office and head toward the canal. Typically, this path would be populated with joggers, casual cyclists, or dog walkers, since it was midday and the area was fairly busy. Strangely, however, on that day, the path seemed unusually quiet. In the distance, Kathleen noticed a few figures moving farther away. As she walked along the road, she passed a few people, but at that time, nothing suspicious. After all, she was on the phone with Johannes, who was an excellent companion for conversation. Kathleen and Johannes were calmly discussing their future plans when suddenly Johannes heard an alarming noise, a scream, followed by a thud, and then the call abruptly disconnected. He immediately tried to call his wife back but was sent to voicemail. Unable to reach Kathleen, he contacted her workplace. By the time he reached her colleagues, they were already concerned because she hadn't returned from her usual walk. Kathleen's prolonged absence was unusual. She maintained a consistent routine, particularly when it came to her lunchtime walks. Known for her reliability, it was entirely out of character for her to leave work without notice. Her co-workers and supervisors were puzzled, while Johannes grew increasingly worried. Efforts to locate her in the office were unsuccessful, prompting them to notify the Concord Police Department around 3 p.m. The police took the matter seriously and immediately began investigating. Within 10 minutes of receiving the call, officers started searching along the route Kathleen was expected to follow. Shortly into their search, they discovered blood on the pavement along with marks resembling bicycle tire tracks. The blood smear extended into nearby bushes. Following the trail, the police found Kathleen's sneaker around 3:30 p.m. Her co-workers identified the bloodied shoe, which lay in a pool of blood. Just a few meters from this spot, in a wooded area, a mutilated body was discovered lying on the ground amidst a horrifying scene. The victim appeared to have been brutally attacked and murdered. The assault was so violent that she could only be identified by her clothing, which was mostly pulled down. Authorities believed the attack was motivated by abuse. Kathleen was still alive at first, though she was in critical condition. She was rushed to the nearest medical center, but medical intervention was unsuccessful. At 4:54 p.m., she was declared dead due to a traumatic brain injury. Her skull had been completely shattered during the attack, leaving her head severely crushed. Kathleen, who was employed by a local company, had been attacked while walking on the trail. Johannes had heard her scream over the phone during the assault. Kathleen suffered severe head trauma caused by a blunt object, and after the initial blow, she was dragged into the nearby bushes. Along the way, She endured further brutal beatings, with fragments of her scalp and hair later found along the trail of blood. The area where the crime took place was concealed from view by a hill, making it easier for the attacker to go unnoticed. But the question remained, who could commit such a barbaric and horrific act against a woman? Police requested backup, and forensic experts meticulously examined the crime scene for evidence. Detectives interviewed Kathleen's colleagues and local residents, while law enforcement appealed to the public through the media, seeking witnesses or crucial information. The city offered a $10,000 reward for tips leading to the criminal's arrest. Early in the investigation, only a few reports surfaced, none of which provided useful information. A thorough search of the path and the bushes where Kathleen had been dragged also failed to uncover any new clues. The murderer appeared experienced in committing violent crimes, leaving no trace behind. An autopsy revealed the extent of the brutality Kathleen had suffered. She was severely beaten over an extended period and was also abused. Detectives confirmed that it was an unprovoked act, a conclusion that was corroborated by Johannes. The attack was spontaneous, leaving Kathleen with no chance to defend herself. She sustained no defensive injuries, as she likely lost consciousness after the first blow to her head. Investigators began exploring possible theories about the killer. One theory suggested that the culprit could have been a maniac acting in a state of extreme emotional disturbance, given the excessive cruelty of the crime. Another theory considered a personal connection between Kathleen and the perpetrator, yet who could harbor such hatred toward a kind and gentle woman like her? Johannes, her husband, was unable to provide any meaningful leads. Although the assault took place while Kathleen was talking to him on the phone, he did not hear any names or clues that could reveal the attacker's identity. It appeared Kathleen was struck immediately, causing her phone to be knocked out of her hand, fall to the ground, and shut off. Within an hour of searching, the forensic scientist discovered what appeared to be the murder weapon, a metal rod, torn from a fence made of thick, concreted steel bars. It seemed likely the attacker had discarded it near the crime scene. A bloodied fragment of the rod lay just a few meters away from Kathleen's body. The investigation revealed that she had been struck multiple times with the rod, causing fatal skull fractures. Even if she had survived, the injuries would have left her permanently paralyzed. Friends and family were unable to suggest anyone who might have had a motive to harm Kathleen. With no clear leads, detectives focused on her immediate social circle. They discovered that she had a calm and non-aggressive personality, consistently avoiding anything unlawful or confrontational. Her life was generally peaceful, except for one tumultuous period, her divorce in 1987 from her first husband, Jeffrey Line. Known to be a particularly bitter process, the divorce raised suspicions about Jeffrey. Detectives speculated that Jeffrey might have harbored lingering resentment toward Kathleen, which could have intensified upon learning of her recent wedding. This potential surge of anger might have led him to act impulsively. However, the investigation stalled, leaving the crime unsolved. When the crime scene was eventually reopened, unease persisted in the area. Local residents avoided the spot, fearing another violent incident, and employees of nearby businesses stopped visiting, concerned about encountering a possible predator. Kathleen's second husband, Johannes, was quickly cleared as a suspect. His alibi was solid, confirmed by a verified mobile phone call that placed him far from the crime scene at the time. Investigators also interviewed Jeffrey, the ex-husband, who also had an ironclad alibi. They explored the possibility that either man could have hired someone to commit the crime. However, this line of inquiry led nowhere and seemed unlikely from the outset. Within hours of contacting the police, both men were removed from the list of suspects. As investigators scrutinized the area surrounding Kathleen's body, they discovered something significant was missing: her phone. If she had been on a call during the attack, where was her phone? Detectives suspected the killer might have taken it. Tracing the phone's signal led them to a residential complex just a 5-minute drive from the forest where the body was found. Police quickly obtained a search warrant for the entire building. During the search, officers encountered Juan Sanchez, a 20-year-old resident, who reluctantly admitted that he had Kathleen's phone. At first, it seemed he might be involved in the crime. However, Juan denied any wrongdoing, explaining that he had found the phone earlier that day while riding his bike. On his way back from the store, he came across a phone abandoned near the blood trail that detectives had discovered earlier. Juan led authorities to the location where he had found it, approximately 50 meters from the trail. The authorities found Juan's account plausible but opted to verify it through DNA testing. Kathleen had been abused, and biological samples collected from her body allowed investigators to create a DNA profile of the attacker. However, the case predated advanced DNA analysis techniques, and the process took significant time. Once the attacker's profile was developed, it was compared to entries in the DNA database, which, at the time, contained only around 6 million samples, a relatively limited number. Unfortunately, no match was found. Juan's DNA did not correspond to the crime scene evidence, leaving the investigation at a dead end. As police struggled to make progress in their investigation, fear and confusion grew in the local community. Residents felt unsafe knowing someone capable of such a brutal attack, a broad daylight assault with a steel rod, was still free. Investigators speculated that someone in Kathleen's social circle might have been infatuated with her, harboring jealousy or anger over her marriage. This theory became the primary focus of the investigation during that period. According to one of Kathleen's colleagues, shortly before she met Johannes, she had a brief relationship with a young German man. A friend stated that Kathleen was supposed to meet him just a few days before the attack. It seemed that she was feeling uncertain, so she wanted to clarify things by explaining that she was married and wanted him to end any hope of pursuing a relationship with her. Though a deeper relationship was clearly impossible, she was willing to meet him once, as he seemed to have good intentions. However, some individuals do not handle rejection well, which can sometimes lead to dangerous behavior. The investigators began looking into this clue, but they could not confirm any meetings or communications between Kathleen and the German man. When Johannes entered her life, this connection was severed entirely. From interviews with people who were in the area on the day of the incident, the detectives uncovered something noteworthy. Shortly before Kathleen was attacked, a suspicious man was seen in the vicinity. According to witnesses, his behavior was odd. One passerby mentioned that he had tried to lure Kathleen into the bushes under the pretense of showing her something, while another person described the man fishing in a nearby pond. These witnesses worked with a sketch artist, resulting in 2 separate portraits based on their descriptions. Although the witnesses had not communicated with each other, the sketches displayed striking similarities, which boosted the police's confidence that they now had a visual of the suspect. The reward for information leading to the capture of the criminal has been increased by $25,000, bringing the total to $35,000. This reward is offered by the company where Kathleen used to work. As expected, this generated a flood of unrelated tips, many of which were ultimately unrelated to the case. A press conference was held, during which Mike, Kathleen's eldest child, made an emotional public appeal asking for help to find his mother's killer. Authorities also released sketches of the suspected perpetrator. Simultaneously, detectives compared the sketches to a database of known criminals with histories of abuse or violence. Based on the psychological profile, they believed the suspect was an experienced offender with a history of violent behavior, likely including incidents involving bloodshed. Their investigation eventually led them to identify John Kaler as a match to the released sketch. Trained dogs were brought in and followed his scent to his home, but the trail ended near a highway just a few kilometers away. 3 days after the attack, on May 16, 2003, the police arrived at John's residence. To their surprise, it wasn't John who answered the door but a frightened and frail woman. She introduced herself as his sister, Elizabeth, and stated that the officers had arrived too late. She explained that on May 14, after the press circulated images of the suspect following a press conference, John went to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco and ended his life. Detectives concluded this was no coincidence and believed John had ended his life due to the enormity of committing one of the most senseless and violent crimes in recent history. The police obtained warrants to search John's residence, and the findings confirmed their suspicions. Among the evidence were bloody clothes matching witness descriptions of the man seen on the day of the attack on Kathleen. They also found newspaper clippings about the crime, a behavior often associated with murderers. Additionally, they discovered a cutout likeness of the police sketch, created based on witness accounts, which closely resembled John. John's prior offenses were relatively minor compared to the heinous crime he was now suspected of committing, leaving everyone shocked that he could be responsible for such an atrocity. Authorities believed his mental health struggles may have contributed to his dangerous tendencies. However, John's parents strongly disagreed. His father criticized law enforcement, accusing them of unfairly linking his son's mental health condition to the horrific crime. He saw this as an insult to his son's memory and a way to unjustly defame a man already suffering from an illness. The police required John's DNA to confirm or refute the evidence against him. Witnesses who assisted in creating the composite sketch were shown photographs of John, and all of them identified him as the same suspicious individual seen on the walking path. As the news spread, media outlets and newspapers picked up the story, fueling public speculation. John's father passionately defended his son's innocence, prompting authorities to hold a press conference where they admitted that their suspicions might be unfounded until the DNA results were finalized. This reignited public concern about the potential threat posed by an unidentified criminal. When authorities reviewed John's history, they discovered he had been arrested 4 times for drunk driving over the past decade. Additionally, in 1987, he had threatened to kill a judge's mother, which led the judge to believe there could be no mistake in identifying him as the suspect. However, the DNA test results were shocking. John was not responsible for Kathleen's murder and assault. The revelation profoundly shocked the public, especially after John had faced severe backlash due to the media's portrayal of him as guilty based on suspicion alone. His family demanded an apology, arguing that the damage inflicted on John's reputation ultimately drove him to end his life. The publication of portraits resembling him further contributed to his devastation. John's father advocated for legal reforms to protect the families of suspects when there is insufficient evidence. Tragically, despite their efforts, their family inadvertently fell victim to the fallout from the investigation. Kathleen's loved ones, trying to help solve the case, donated $5,000 to a reward fund for information leading to the perpetrator's capture. This brought the total reward to $40,000, but it did little to advance the investigation. Detectives worked diligently, collecting DNA samples from at least 5 different men, but none provided breakthroughs. Approximately 4 months after the murder, a witness who had previously spoken to investigators returned to the station with new information. He described encountering a suspicious man with a bicycle near the canal shortly before the attack. The man was standing in an unusual location, looking around nervously, and appeared alarmed upon noticing the witness. The two briefly spoke, smoked a cigarette together, and then parted ways. Hoping this encounter might yield evidence, the police asked the witness to identify the location. Remarkably, they discovered the cigarette, but the men had smoked among others in the area. DNA testing on the filter confirmed a match, providing a critical lead in the case. The witness met with the police again and shared detailed information about the suspicious cyclist. While he did not know the man's identity, he learned during their conversation that the individual worked at a telemarketing company in Walnut Creek, located about 15 minutes from the walking trail. Since there was only one telemarketing company in the area, the police visited its offices. With witness-provided sketches and some assumptions, detectives reviewed photographs of all the employees. Colleagues quickly identified one employee, 38-year-old Robert Ward Frazier, who bore an uncanny resemblance to John Kaler, so much so that the two might have been mistaken for brothers. Suspiciously, Robert had stopped coming to work shortly after the murder. Detectives tracked down his last known residence and visited his apartment, but their efforts led to another dead end. Robert's ex-wife disclosed that he had left a few weeks earlier. While she did not know his current location, she provided his toothbrush, which allowed investigators to collect DNA for comparison with evidence from the crime scene. The case stalled once again, pending DNA analysis. Then, unexpectedly, the police received a tip from a sheriff's office in Indiana, where Robert had been arrested for an unrelated offense. He had attempted to return to his hometown but was wanted in another state for violating probation conditions before moving to California. Authorities questioned Robert, who admitted to living near the area where Kathleen was murdered. However, he vehemently denied any involvement in the crime. Originally, Robert denied having any involvement in the case. However, DNA test results confirmed a match to the crime scene evidence. When confronted, he claimed that he had walked along the path while intoxicated, needed to relieve himself, and may have accidentally left DNA traces on Kathleen's body while urinating. However, this explanation did not account for how his bodily fluids ended up inside her. Even when faced with incontrovertible evidence, Robert continued to fabricate lies. The DNA results clearly implicated him, which led to his arrest on charges of abuse and first-degree murder. The severity of the case meant that John faced the possibility of receiving the death penalty or, at the very least, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In May 2006, Robert went to court, showing no emotion and refusing to admit to his crimes. His defense team scrambled to find ways to lessen his sentence, while the prosecution relied on the uncompromising evidence of the case. Simply recounting the horrifying details, a crime driven by cruel lust, was enough to shock the jury. The trial lasted an entire month, despite the strength of the prosecution's arguments. Ultimately, Robert Ward Frazier was found guilty on all charges. In a final effort to reduce the sentence, the defense attorneys emphasized his troubled early years. They explained that he grew up with parents who had substance abuse problems, which resulted in significant hardships. Robert endured immense psychological pressure as well as abuse, experiences that the lawyers claimed had shaped him into the person he had become. However, the prosecutor countered that a traumatic childhood does not justify committing violent acts. The jury ultimately concluded that Robert Ward Frazier deserved the death penalty. Upon hearing the verdict, he displayed emotion for the first time during the trial, accusing everyone of being biased against him. He is currently on death row, awaiting the execution of his sentence, all while continuing to proclaim his innocence. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Nolan Buchanan. California is known for its beautiful natural attractions, particularly in El Dorado County, which borders Nevada and is close to the well-known Lake Tahoe. In this rural region lies the small town of Greenwood, home to over 1,000 residents. Tourism is one of the main economic sectors here. On the morning of Sunday, September 13, 2015, everything seemed normal until an urgent call to 911 reported a large fire in the forest area. Immediate action was necessary to prevent the fire from spreading. Firefighters quickly arrived at the scene and began extinguishing the fire, but the flames rapidly surged to heights of 33 feet. Fortunately, there was a stream nearby that helped extinguish most of the fire. The next step was to check the area to ensure that no one was injured and to assess the damage. During the survey, it was found that a small building measuring about 55 square meters had completely burned down, with only the foundation remaining. What caught the firefighters' attention was a strange smell that was later identified as the smell of burning flesh. Initially, the firefighters considered the possibility that a pet might have been trapped inside the house, but they quickly ruled this out when they found a human skull and a burnt rib cage. Sadly, it became clear that the fire had claimed someone's life. The grim discovery was promptly reported to the police, who faced a challenge. Parts of the house were still on fire, making it impossible to conduct a thorough examination. They had to wait until the fire was out and the temperature dropped. As the police stood outside observing the fire, they reached some preliminary conclusions. They determined that the house was clearly not the owner's official residence since it was situated in a remote and isolated area. Additionally, the house was very small, measuring less than 60 square meters, and it was likely a vacation home. Through their ongoing surveillance, the police suspected there might be more victims beyond the remains they had found, but they could not confirm this. To gather more insights, they decided to examine the nearby area. The total area associated with the house was 8 hectares and was owned by someone. On the property, They discovered a large trailer and an old pickup truck, which were registered to a company. They were able to check the license plates to identify the vehicle's owner, who might have been in the house during the fire. The search was quick, revealing that the truck and trailer belonged to a company called Buchanan Construction, owned by an individual named Adam Buchanan. Adam lived 250 kilometers, 155 miles, away, which is about a 3-hour drive. This information supported the police's suspicion that the house was merely a vacation retreat for those looking to escape the city. However, it remained to be determined who had been inside, Adam himself or someone else. Late on September 13th, 2 bodies were discovered in the burning building. The name of the company owner provided detectives with their first lead in the investigation. The police were tasked with checking on the well-being of all members of the Buchanan family to see if they were at home. They arrived at the family's residence and soon noticed a white Ford pickup truck in the driveway. A young man named Nolan Buchanan emerged from the house, surprised to see the uniformed officers, and asked about the reason for their visit. The police did not disclose the reason right away, wanting first to determine who else was home. Nolan announced that he was Adam's son from Adam's first marriage. He stated that his father, Adam, had gone to the country estate with his fiancée, Molly, and their 8-year-old son, Gavin, for a short vacation, and they planned to return that evening. The officers needed to identify the bodies found in the house, as they might belong to the Buchanan family members. Nolan stated that there should have been 3 people in the home, but only 2 bodies were found in the debris. To determine the identities, further examination was required, but the wreckage was still too hot for a thorough inspection. The next day, September 14th, the El Dorado County Police planned to speak with Nolan again to gather more information about the victims of the fire. The officers met with Adam's parents, who expressed their concern that their son, the owner of the burnt house, had not reached out to them. During their conversation, it became apparent that Adam, who had some experience with repairs, had been working on fixing the house. Although the building was connected to a generator, there was no electricity at the time of the incident. However, there were gas cylinders present, suggesting that the fire could have started accidentally or been set intentionally. Both possibilities remained open. Afterward, the police continued to search the forest area and gathered some evidence, though it was insufficient to advance the investigation. They could only access the ruins of the burnt house on September 15th. Investigators hoped that the objects discovered inside would provide crucial information for understanding the incident that occurred there. During the excavation process, they discovered a 3rd body, which attracted a lot of attention from the investigators because there was a round hole in one of the bones. This discovery suggested that something sinister had happened within the house. Accidental death was ruled out, and the possibility of murder became the primary focus. There was a strong belief that the fire had been set to destroy evidence of the crime. However, questions remained about how the incident occurred. Was it a botched burglary, or was a dangerous killer responsible for the deaths in that area? While the victims had not yet been identified, there was a strong likelihood that they were all members of the Buchanan family. To confirm this, the remains were sent to a forensic expert for an autopsy, with instructions to identify the bodies and determine their causes of death. It was discovered that one victim had been attacked in the torso, and another victim had a bullet fragment found in their vertebra. Unfortunately, the second body was too severely charred to yield much information, but the presence of cartridges nearby strongly suggested intentional murder. The remains of a 3rd individual, identified as a skull fragment, confirmed that the person had died from a weapon attached to the head. The medical examiner revealed that the victim was a child. Detectives verified their suspicions about the identities of the deceased, confirming they were members of the Buchanan family, Adam, Gavin, and Molly McAfee. All 3 of them had been attacked. The police faced a difficult challenge in informing the victims' families about their tragic fate. The families had held on to hope until the end, struggling to accept the reality of their loss, and nothing could truly prepare them for the heartbreaking news. Upon learning what happened, the relatives were left devastated and grief-stricken. Neither Molly, known for her cheerful and friendly demeanor, nor Adam, who cherished his partner, had any enemies who would wish them harm. Although Adam had experienced a difficult marriage and raised his son Nolan from that relationship, this alone seemed unlikely to lead to murder. Marriages often have their ups and downs, and many couples find themselves separated or divorced. After parting ways with his first wife, Adam continued to care for their son, Nolan, hoping that Nolan would one day take over his construction business. After overcoming his emotional pain, Adam decided to seek a new relationship with Molly through a dating website. Their first date took place at a Starbucks coffee shop. They discovered they had much in common, including Molly's experience working in a construction company. It was love at first sight. Adam wasted no time in inviting Molly to move in with him, and she happily agreed. Their life together blossomed, and for 10 years, they enjoyed a deep and fulfilling partnership. Both of them dreamed of having a child. A few years after they met, Molly became pregnant and gave birth to Gavin, who became a half-brother to Nolan, Adam's eldest son. It seemed like a perfect family picture. However, family members noticed that their relationship was not as stable as it appeared. Adam and Molly often argued. Although Molly never filed for divorce, she would occasionally take their son and stay at her parents' house for a few days. It was also revealed that Adam and Molly liked to hunt near their country home. Since both owned weapons, investigators speculated that during one of their arguments, one of them might have grabbed a weapon, leading to a tragic outcome. The investigation raised concerns. If the tragedy stemmed from a conflict between the couple, there should have been a weapon found next to one of the bodies. The police carried out a thorough search of the scene to find the weapon involved in the incident. The possibility that the weapon had been badly damaged or almost completely destroyed in the fire was considered, but the search for it continued. If the weapon had been found, it would have supported the theory that Adam and Molly were involved. If not, it would suggest that an outsider may have harmed the family. Over 5 days, forensic team members methodically sifted through the ashes of the house. Their thorough search ultimately yielded no weapons, leading to the conclusion that Adam and Molly were not the perpetrators. It was also clear that 8-year-old Gavin was innocent, indicating that a fourth person was involved in the incident. The absence of a murder weapon was troubling, as it meant the investigation had to restart from square one, without any suspects or evidence. As is customary in such cases, detectives meticulously examined the family's history and relationships. While they had already interviewed Adam's parents, they had not yet spoken with his eldest son, Nolan. It was time to ask him some questions. The 16-year-old boy, Nolan, shared that after his parents divorced, he felt very anxious but tried to stay strong. He lived with his grandparents. When asked why he didn't go on vacation with his relatives, he explained that he felt it was his responsibility to take care of the house and garden while his father and stepmother were away. According to Nolan, they got into an old pickup truck and headed to Greenwood, the same truck that the police had seen near the burning building. Adam chose to use the service vehicle rather than his own because it was loaded with stones he planned to use for landscaping at his country home. The investigators asked Nolan if he was aware of any issues with his neighbors. He replied that someone was regularly growing banned substances on his family's remote property. This caught the detectives' attention, particularly because, in this part of the United States, violent crime is often associated with the cultivation of banned substances. The conversation with Nolan continued, shifting to the family business. He revealed that his father's business had been struggling lately. The company was facing significant challenges in the United States, with its employee count dwindling to just 5. Financially, the situation was critical, and the debts related to the business were quickly accumulating, according to what his father reported. Fortunately, the investigation had gathered valuable information, allowing the case to progress. On September 18, 2015, investigators began looking into a conflict that arose regarding the cultivation of illegal plants in that area. It was revealed that there was indeed a disagreement between Adam and his neighbors. He confronted them, demanding that they stop growing and harvesting the tree on his property, threatening to involve the police if they did not comply. Detectives believed that this ultimatum could potentially escalate into a desire to harm Adam's family. However, no one knew which neighbor was involved. To gather more details about the situation, the investigators decided to explore the neighborhood on foot. One of the investigators had a breakthrough when he met a man who admitted to arguing with Adam over the cultivation of an illegal crop. The argument was intense, but they managed to resolve their differences. However, Adams' business was facing a financial crisis. On September 17th, police conducted a raid on Adams' company, confirming Nolan's claims about its dire situation. Debts exceeding $30,000 were putting it at risk of bankruptcy, leading to layoffs of some employees. It came to light that some of these former employees were very unhappy about being let go and might have motives related to the murder investigation. Investigators sought and obtained a warrant to access the company's premises and review its documents. The following day, September 19th, local high school students participated in a community cleanup just a mile away from Adams' construction company. During the cleanup process, a student discovered a small bag hidden behind a bush with a weapon next to it. The school management promptly informed the police, who examined the bag and found Adams' identification inside it. This led to a new theory: the victims were murdered, the weapon was found, and the killer may have taken Adams' documents in order to obstruct the investigation. The discovery was crucial, revealing that someone had traveled from Greenwood to confront the family before returning to Benicia, where they abandoned the bag and weapon. It was likely that the perpetrator was from the local area. Detectives were convinced that the culprit was one of the employees from Adams' construction company, as evidence was discovered just a mile away from the company's headquarters. The weapon and the items found in the bag were well preserved, so they were sent for examination. After obtaining a search warrant, investigators began examining the company's buildings, focusing particularly on financial records that could reveal the names of potential creditors. During the investigation, detectives discovered a surveillance camera at the company's premises, which was a welcome sign. The camera was aimed at the center of the parking lot. Knowing that the family had gone to the countryside on Friday, September 11th, the investigators decided to review the footage from that day to see if anything unusual occurred. In the video, they spotted a large trailer that had previously come to their attention near the family's burned home. The footage also showed Adam and Molly loading pallets of decorative rocks. However, a critical moment changed the course of the investigation. Although it initially seemed insignificant, the vehicle towing the trailer was not the old white pickup parked at the burnt house. It was a white Ford that had been seen in the driveway of the Buchanan home when investigators first questioned Nolan. He had falsely claimed that his relatives had left in the old pickup. With this revelation, the police became very interested in his story. Molly's mother, Susie Slankard, had a suspicion that something was off when she noticed a Ford parked near the burnt house, which was later replaced by an old car. Concerned, she called the police after a strange incident during a family dinner earlier that week. Nolan, who had been questioned about the country house, made an unusual remark, claiming he was no longer just an heir but now the owner. Although his father, Adam, had founded the company, Nolan insisted that the rights had transferred to him. Nolan explained how he planned to take control of the family business and sell its assets to prevent its downfall. It was surprising to hear such statements from someone so young, especially after losing his family. Susie, puzzled by Nolan's odd behavior, contacted the police to express her concerns. As a result, the police summoned Nolan for another interrogation. They did not charge him with any crime or demand explanations. They merely took his statement, in which he spoke vaguely about his whereabouts on the day of the murder. During the second questioning, Nolan provided more details. He claimed that he spent Saturday alone on September 12, 2015, attended church with his girlfriend and her family on Sunday morning. Later, he met friends at the shopping center and then returned to see his girlfriend. The investigators allowed him to continue without interruption but asked once how he had paid for his shopping and date expenses. Nolan said his father's bank card was at home and he used it. Following this, the police requested a search warrant for Adams' house, anticipating valuable evidence. They hoped to seize the bank card to review any transactions. The warrant was granted, and investigators rushed to Adams' house, where they found the card in the upper part of a safe. They also noticed a Ford parked in the driveway, which had dirt lodged in the wheels. It had just rained, and according to the police, the dirt on the wheels might have been washed away or at least significantly reduced. Additionally, a construction company's surveillance camera showed that Nolan had lied about the old pickup truck that the family was supposed to have left behind. The Ford was confiscated for further analysis, making Nolan the main suspect in the murder. Even though he was already under police scrutiny, gathering enough evidence to prove his involvement would be challenging, especially since he was a minor accused of murdering his family. The suspicions were confirmed when the investigation began with laboratory tests on the murder weapon, which revealed Nolan's fingerprints. This indicates that he possessed a weapon. However, further evidence is needed to prove that he went to the scene where his family was present. Detectives examined the bank transactions of Molly and Adam in the days leading up to the murder. A transaction took place on September 11th, just as the family was getting ready to go to their country house. A payment of $36 was made at a restaurant in a small town along the route to Greenwood. When investigators contacted the restaurant management, they confirmed that they had surveillance cameras. The timing of the transaction allowed detectives to establish when the family should have been at the restaurant. In the video footage, they identified the same white Ford towing a large trailer, which had been seen at the crime scene and had been searched and confiscated a few days earlier. Law enforcement officers discovered a receipt for a transaction on Friday, September 11, 2015, which raised questions about the details of the order. The receipt indicated that several sandwiches and 4 drinks had been purchased. Since the Buchanans were a group of 3, the question arose, why would they order 4 drinks? Investigators collected the bag and other trash found in the car to reconstruct the menu associated with the receipt. They also reviewed the trash discovered earlier in the investigation in front of the vacation home. Upon comparing their findings, investigators confirmed that the Ford pickup truck had indeed been in Greenwood. The next bank card transaction occurred on Saturday, September 12th, at a vending machine in a bar approximately a 30-minute drive from Greenwood. As in the first case, investigators visited the bar to review the surveillance footage. The video clearly showed Molly, as well as a woman nearby, withdrawing $40 from an ATM to cover expenses. It was clear that Molly and Adam were present, as their car was visible in the footage outside the bar. This was significant because it confirmed that Adam had his bank card with him that evening, and it remained with him throughout the weekend. After determining the time Molly and Adam left the bar, detectives tracked their route. A restaurant along the way had a camera facing the highway, making it a valuable resource. Investigators reviewed the footage and verified that the Ford truck was headed toward Greenwood around 2:30 a.m. It was widely accepted that Adam and Molly were in the vehicle. However, at 3:30, the same pickup truck was noted returning. Detectives became convinced that, at that moment, Nolan was in the car, driving home after committing the act of killing his family and disposing of their bodies. On September 13th, new transactions were reviewed, including purchases at McDonald's and gas stations. The records indicated that there was no food for 4 people in the paid order. It was noted that the Ford was still parked near the burned house and was driven by Nolan. The detectives checked with the bank and confirmed that only 1 card had been issued in Adam's name. It was clear that this card had been used between September 11th and 13th in Greenwood. With solid evidence in hand, the detectives returned to question Nolan, who was still in high school at that time. Nolan was called out of class for questioning. He said his father had left his bank card at home and had driven to a country house in an old pickup truck, not the Ford he was driving. Faced with the evidence, he fell silent, realizing that the police had caught on to him. After a tense silence, Nolan was officially arrested for the crime committed at the Greenwood house. In November 2015, Nolan was charged with the premeditated murder of his father, Adam, his stepmother, Molly, and his younger brother, Gavin. The defense quickly appealed to a juvenile court to have the case dismissed in Nolan's favor. The legal proceedings in adult court lasted 2 years, and in 2017, they received a response to their request. The ruling confirmed that Nolan would be tried as an adult, even though he had not yet turned 18 at the time of the crimes. The hearings were highly emotional as Nolan claimed he wasn't the killer. He insisted that his father was responsible and that he was merely defending himself. This shocking statement surprised not only the police but also the families of both Adam and Molly. Nolan said he was resting at their family's Greenwood home on September 12th, while Gavin was sleeping in a bed nearby. They both suddenly woke to loud noises and screaming. At that moment, Nolan noticed a weapon aimed at Gavin, and then a shot was fired, killing his younger brother. In a state of panic, Nolan lunged for the weapon. Miraculously, he managed to push the attacker away, take control of the weapon, and attack the man twice. Only after the attack did he realize that the person he was confronting was his father. Understanding the gravity of the situation, he then poured gasoline from a car onto the house and set it ablaze to make it look like nothing had happened. He subsequently left Greenwood in the family's white Ford. However, this account was challenged by a forensic expert, who noted that a bullet impact found on a fragment of Gavin's skull indicated that a shot was fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. The prosecution concluded that Nolan, left alone at home while his parents were at a bar, waited for their return before killing both of them. Evidence suggests he killed Adam first, followed by Molly. Afterward, Nolan took his stepmother's bag and set the house on fire. On Sunday, he spent the day with his girlfriend to establish an alibi. However, the motive behind his actions remains unclear, as he has not confessed. Some speculated could be related to money. Perhaps he thought he could manage the family business better than his father. On July 13, 2018, after 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Nolan Buchanan guilty of murdering Adam, Molly, and their son Gavin. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison but will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years. The Nolan Buchanan case is a tragic and mysterious story that leaves many questions for the residents of Greenwood and the Adam and Molly families. The family had a seemingly peaceful vacation at a vacation home in the woods, but tragedy suddenly struck, taking the lives of Adam, Molly, and Gavin. Nolan, a 16-year-old boy, went from heir to murderer, and was sentenced to 150 years in prison for premeditated murder. The true motive behind this brutal act remains a mystery known only to Nolan. However, he has chosen to keep it a secret, leaving behind loss and sorrow for those left behind. Thank you for following this story. Please share your thoughts and don't forget to check out the next episodes on our channel. See you again. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Jennifer Corbin. Jennifer Corbin, a 33-year-old woman, was married to Barton Corbin, a well-known 40-year-old dentist in Beaufort, Georgia. They have been together for 7 years and live in a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood. They had 2 sons, Dylan and Dalton, aged 5 and 7. From the outside, the Corbins appeared to have an ideal life, a large house, happy family photos, and a stable family dynamic. Barton was regarded as a model father, while Jennifer was deeply devoted to motherhood. Despite their outward appearances, tensions between Jennifer and Barton had been growing. Jennifer, who had been a free-spirited woman in her younger years, transformed into a dedicated wife and mother after getting married and having her first child. She was known for her warm personality and her ease in building relationships with people from all backgrounds and age groups. Her sociable nature led her to volunteer at her church, where she worked in the Sunday school program for children. When Jennifer and Barton first met, her family warmly welcomed him, quickly treating him as one of their own. He often joined them on trips and spent most weekends with them. Barton was seen as intelligent and charismatic, easily winning over those around him. However, over time, the marriage began to falter. Jennifer eventually realized that continuing the relationship was no longer possible. Despite her repeated efforts to repair the marriage, she came to terms with its failure and began preparing for a divorce. Everything changed for the Corbin family on the morning of December 4, 2004. Their eldest son, Dalton, woke up to find the house unusually quiet. His mother usually rose earlier than everyone else, and his father, Barton, would already be preparing for work. But that morning, an eerie silence filled the home. Neither of his parents was anywhere to be found. Concerned, Dalton repeatedly called out to them, but there was no response. Finally, he entered his parents' bedroom and was horrified to find his mother lifeless. Horrified by the scene, Dalton, still wearing his pajamas, rushed to their neighbors for help, too distressed to even change his clothes. The neighbors quickly entered the house and confirmed that his mother, Jennifer, had passed away. Without wasting any time, they called emergency services at 11 a.m. When relatives were notified of the tragic news, they were in utter disbelief. Nobody could have ever imagined such a terrible incident, especially since Jennifer had always been viewed as a strong and devoted mother. By the time family members arrived at Jennifer's house, law enforcement officers were already on the scene conducting their investigation. Her sister Heather went to the neighbor's home to comfort and care for Dalton and Dylan. Meanwhile, Dalton was inconsolable, crying uncontrollably. The traumatic experience left a deep psychological scar on him, and he struggled for a long time to cope with the horrifying memory of what he had witnessed. Jennifer's body was found in the bedroom of her house. She was wearing a nightgown and lying on her side. A weapon was discovered under the sheet next to her, with her hand resting nearby. Divorce papers were also found under the sheet. On the nightstand, there was an open bottle of wine. Jennifer had been going through an incredibly difficult time. Her husband had filed for divorce, sought custody of their children, planned to take the case to the Supreme Court to claim their property, and even demanded alimony. At first glance, the scene suggests that Jennifer voluntarily ended her life. The challenges she faced seemed overwhelming, and she had previously expressed frustration at seeing what she had long considered an ideal marriage crumble before her eyes. During this time, Jennifer frequently confided in her loved ones, sharing her fears of potentially losing custody of her children and the difficulties she anticipated during the divorce proceedings. Despite the police initially ruling her death as a voluntary act of ending her life, her family strongly disagreed with this conclusion. By late December, their frustration with the authorities had reached its peak. They insisted that she would never harm herself. To her, the divorce was not a tragedy but rather an opportunity to finally gain the freedom she had long awaited, despite the obstacles ahead. Her family emphasized that Jennifer had at least two vital reasons to live: her two sons, Dalton and Dylan. Everyone who knew Jennifer well was convinced she would never harm herself. Even if she had, they believed she would neither have done it at home nor allowed her child to be the one to discover her. It was clear to everyone that someone else must have been involved. Her relatives demanded that the culprit be identified and brought to justice, while her parents even had a prime suspect in mind: her husband, Barton Corbin. Typically, in cases like this, the spouse is the first to be investigated. Accompanied by a lawyer, Barton went to the police station to answer their questions. He stated that the night before Jennifer's death, he had been at a restaurant with friends until 1 a.m. Afterward, he drove to his brother's house, where he spent the night. Barton explained that he and Jennifer had argued earlier, and he chose not to return home, meaning he hadn't seen her since the previous day. He voluntarily handed over the clothes he had worn that evening, and detectives found no traces of bloodstains, scratches, or signs of defensive wounds on him. Testing for gunpowder residue on his hands also came back negative. With no further evidence to implicate Barton, investigators had no additional questions for him. Meanwhile, Jennifer's relatives continued to insist that she had been murdered. As they pushed for further investigation, the district attorney began looking into the troubled history of Jennifer's marriage to Barton. What they uncovered was a dark past connected to Barton's time as a dentist. While investigators delved into Barton's background, they discovered that 14 years prior to Jennifer's death, he had been involved in another romantic relationship that ended under similarly suspicious circumstances. During that time, Barton dated a fellow dentistry classmate named Dolly Hearn, a bright, cheerful, and beautiful young woman. Interestingly, Jennifer's family had never heard of Dolly until the investigation began. But what had happened to Dolly? According to Dolly's sister, she met Barton in their third year at Georgia Medical College, where they were both studying dentistry and living on campus. Initially, the relationship seemed fine, but over time it grew strained and became increasingly aggressive. Witnesses recalled that as the relationship deteriorated, Barton became overly jealous and verbally abusive. Dolly eventually decided to end the relationship. However, following the breakup, her life took a troubling turn. A series of strange and unsettling incidents began occurring, leading Dolly to consider contacting the police. Her apartment was broken into, The windows of her car were smashed, paint was poured into her gas tank, and a parcel was stolen from her mailbox. Later, an essential coursework file containing a patient list from a dental clinic mysteriously disappeared. One particularly concerning incident involved someone breaking into Dolly's apartment and swapping her contact lens solution with hairspray. The most concerning incident, however, was the disappearance of her cat, which was never found. At first, Dolly dismissed these occurrences as mere bad luck, a rough patch in her life. But as the incidents mounted, she began to recognize a pattern. These were not random coincidences. Dolly felt targeted and tormented. She confided in friends and family, convinced that her ex-boyfriend Barton, who had been struggling to cope with their breakup and behaving aggressively, was responsible. Determined to catch Barton in the act, Dolly attempted to secretly record a conversation with him, hoping he would confess to his actions. However, Barton grew suspicious and abruptly ended the conversation. After that meeting, the unsettling incidents in Dolly's life began to taper off. Still, she lived in fear, avoiding being alone in her apartment and worrying about the possibility of future attacks or ambushes. As summer vacation approaches, Dolly gradually returns to her normal life, leaving all her problems behind and believing that Barton has ceased to harass her. She even attended her brother's graduation, looking radiant and happy. Tragically, no one could have predicted that she had only a few days left to live. On the afternoon of June 6, 1990, Dolly's neighbor discovered her lifeless body in her apartment. She died from a single weapon wound to the head. A weapon was found on her lap as she sat cross-legged. The weapon wound on the right side of her head led detectives to conclude that she had voluntarily ended her life. Similar to Jennifer's case years later, Dolly's death was quickly ruled as the end of her life. Unfortunately, due to the lack of investigative rigor in the 1990s, such cases were often inadequately examined. The presence of the weapon and the fundamental circumstances surrounding her death were accepted at face value, and the case was closed without additional investigation. Dolly's family, like Jennifer's relatives, is convinced that Dolly could not have voluntarily ended her life. They found it difficult to accept that such a bright, beautiful, and cheerful young woman, full of potential and showing no signs of depression, would voluntarily end her life. Both her mother and sister insisted that Barton should be investigated, especially because there had been a difficult breakup shortly before the tragedy, and his behavior had been suspicious. Although Barton was interrogated in the 1990s in connection with these suspicions, the authorities were unable to find concrete evidence linking him to a crime. Barton denied any involvement, and the investigation was eventually dropped, concluding that Dolly had voluntarily ended her life. Nonetheless, the case was never officially closed, thanks to Dolly's family's determination to seek justice. Her relatives tirelessly urged law enforcement to fully resolve the case. Even independent experts hired by the family concluded that Dolly's death was likely a voluntary act to end her life. Her mother, however, refused to believe that there was any good reason for her daughter to do so. Her mother maintained that Dolly had lived in fear of Barton during her final months and held him solely responsible for her death. Barton was described by his peers as intelligent and highly perceptive. His mind and ability to manipulate others often complicated matters. However, not everyone was deceived by him. For instance, one of Dolly's classmates believed her fears about Barton and repeatedly urged her to take precautions. Following this advice, Dolly decided to purchase a weapon for self-defense. Despite her financial difficulties, her father came to her aid, lending her a weapon and warning her that if she did not confront Barton, her life would be in danger. Tragically, his warning proved true. However, there was no evidence to implicate Barton in Dolly's death. Her case remained unsolved for 14 years, until the death of Jennifer. The circumstances of Jennifer's death, including the weapon used and the staged nature of the scene, bore striking similarities to Dolly's case. Upon further investigation, authorities reopened Dolly's case and re-examined both incidents. They had no substance abuse, no criminal activity or negative influences, and no apparent reason for them to voluntarily end their lives. The only connection between them was Barton. The case files were retrieved from archives, allowing investigators to revisit the materials with a fresh perspective and advanced forensic techniques. Crime scene photos from 1990 were handed over to a blood spatter expert, who enlarged the images and identified 3 distinct marks that suggested the body had been moved after the attack. This raises doubts because it is very rare for a woman to die from self-inflicted injuries to the back of the head, an unusual method that requires an arm position which is difficult to achieve naturally. Furthermore, neither case included a suicide note. Would Jennifer truly have voluntarily ended her life without leaving a goodbye note for her children behind? The circumstances increasingly appeared staged. Investigators then initiated wiretapping of Barton's phone. When a friend called Barton and informed him that the investigation into Dolly's case had been reopened, he reacted angrily by calling his ex-girlfriend and making an abusive phone call. According to those who knew him, his disrespect for women was not uncommon. At the same time, he was always skillful at concealing his true behavior and attitude. Thanks to wiretapping, the authorities were finally able to uncover the truth about his real character. Jennifer's relatives, upon learning about Dolly's case, felt compelled to meet her family. They discovered many similarities, particularly a shared goal of holding Barton accountable and ensuring his imprisonment. What shocked Jennifer's family the most was that Barton had never mentioned the tragic story of Dolly. 6 years after that incident, he went on to marry Jennifer. Had Jennifer known about these unsettling details, she would never have pursued a relationship with him. Both families were stunned and questioned why the authorities had overlooked these connections for so long. Even 7-year-old Dalton, who found his mother's body, told detectives during their first conversation that he believed his father was responsible for her death. Those who knew Barton were well aware of his explosive temper. Jennifer's family recalled that, for years, he frequently had angry outbursts, often directed at her or their sons. Toward the end of their time together, arguments became a daily occurrence. Shortly before her death, Jennifer confided in her mother that she no longer loved Barton and was staying in the marriage solely for the sake of their children. However, she has recently realized that Barton's presence was not benefiting their children. According to her family, the turning point occurred on Thanksgiving in 2004. During the holiday, Barton suddenly declared that they needed to leave. Not wanting to provoke an argument, Jennifer gathered their sons and left with him. That evening, she called her sister and revealed that Barton had attacked her in the car, in front of their sons. The following Monday, Barton filed for divorce. He demanded ownership of the house, custody of the children, and alimony. 2 days later, Jennifer caught him going through her purse. He stole her personal diary and cell phone before leaving the house, running over her foot with his car as he drove away. Nevertheless, she did not report him to the police. At this point, Jennifer began fearing for her safety. Only 3 days later, she was found dead. Her family was shocked by Barton's reaction to the news of her death. He showed no emotion, no sadness or shock. His cold demeanor immediately raised suspicions among investigators. While his reaction suggested guilt, it was not enough evidence to charge him. Prosecutors required concrete evidence connecting Barton to the weapon discovered near Jennifer's body. Upon investigation, they discovered that the weapon was a rare, older Smith & Wesson model. Its serial number was traced back to a dealer in Alabama, who had sold it in 1957. This discovery provided investigators with an important lead. They learned that Barton had a close friend in Alabama named Richard Wilson, a weapon collector with a particular interest in rare models. Richard and Barton had been friends since their college days. Investigators decided to interview Richard on December 15, 2004. During the interview, he stated that he had only vaguely heard about Jennifer's death and knew none of the details. He claimed that Barton had merely mentioned his wife's death without offering any specifics. He also denied knowing anything about firearms related to the incident. Unfortunately, the encounter did not provide investigators with any useful information. The police then shifted their approach and decided to track the geolocation of Barton's mobile phone. Barton claimed that on the night of his wife's murder, he had been out of town with friends and had later stayed at his brother's house, returning only the following morning. He insisted that his wife and children were alone at home that night. However, the estimated time of Jennifer's death was around 2 a.m. Phone records revealed that Barton's mobile phone was near the house at the time of her death. This revelation destroyed Barton's alibi and significantly heightened suspicions, marking his first major misstep in the investigation. Based on data from local cell towers, Barton had arrived at Jennifer's house at approximately 1 a.m. and left at around 2 a.m., aligning precisely with the time of Jennifer's murder. A neighbor also reported seeing a car resembling Barton's near the house that night. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet and the path it entered Jennifer's head did not match the angle or location consistent with her self-harm. Blood samples from her face also showed a nearly 180-degree change in the direction of flow, contrary to what would normally be expected in a case of self-harm. A detailed forensic analysis of the bullet trajectory and gunshot residue further revealed that it would have been physically impossible for Jennifer to have held the weapon in such a manner to attack herself. Strangely, no fingerprints, neither hers nor anyone else's, were found on the weapon. This strongly suggests that the weapon was wiped clean after use. If Jennifer had died instantly, the question arose, who could have done this? Being a dentist, Barton would have had access to latex gloves, which he could have used to handle the weapon without leaving fingerprints. Another critical piece of evidence was the absence of gunpowder residue on Jennifer's hands. If she had attacked herself at such close range, gunpowder traces would have been unavoidable. Additionally, the mortal wound killed her instantly, causing her body to go limp. This would have made it impossible for her hand to be resting on the weapon underneath the sheet. Clearly, she could not have placed it there herself. County authorities were unable to complete their investigation into Jennifer's murder, but they had already charged Barton with the murder of Dolly. He was arrested, and his dramatic capture was broadcasted on the news. Barton clearly had no idea that the first charge against him was related to the massacre that had occurred 14 years earlier. For Dolly's family, the live broadcast of the arrest was the most meaningful moment of their lives, something they had been waiting for 14 years. Soon after, Barton faced accusations of murdering his spouse, Jennifer. Consequently, he had to confront two groups of prosecutors simultaneously. To defend himself, Barton hired top-tier lawyers. During the preliminary hearing, Barton's defense attorney argued that Jennifer and Dolly had voluntarily taken their own lives, claiming that the link between Barton and the cases was purely coincidental. Several independent forensic experts supported this argument, aligning their findings with the defense's claims. Additionally, the defense insinuated that renewed interest in Jennifer's case had reignited suspicions about Dolly's death, accusing investigators of drawing superficial and unfounded conclusions in both cases. The prosecution, however, highlighted the improbability that two women, Jennifer and Dolly, both romantically involved with the same man, would die in similarly tragic circumstances as mere coincidence. While the prosecutor's office presented strong evidence, the defense skillfully challenged these claims. For example, they argued that the blow during the Thanksgiving altercation was not an act of domestic violence but an unintentional slip, a point that could weaken the prosecution's case. As for the absence of fingerprints on the weapon used in Jennifer's murder, the defense explained that the textured surface of the handle made it difficult to produce clear prints, a claim supported by some forensic experts. In the Supreme Court, the defense aimed to counter the prosecution's arguments by highlighting procedural errors in the investigation and methodically addressing each point. They proposed alternative explanations, such as the possibility that gunpowder particles were trapped in Jennifer's hair, which could account for the absence of traces on her hands. The defense meticulously analyzed inconsistencies in the prosecutor's narrative, including presenting a plausible angle of bullet entry and demonstrating a method of holding the weapon that Jennifer could have executed herself. Barton's phone was detected near Jennifer's house around 2 a.m., but the defense argued that this was insignificant due to the unknown exact time of her death. This argument gained traction as her body temperature suggested that she might have died much later. One expert estimated her death occurred around 6 or 7 a.m., a time when Barton was confirmed to have been elsewhere. The defense also emphasized that Jennifer had strong motives to end her life due to her tumultuous personal circumstances, including a divorce, a collapsing family situation, the risk of losing both her home and custody of her children, and the possibility of having to pay alimony to her husband. Further complicating the situation was Jennifer's online relationship with a man named Chris, which had been ongoing for some time. This relationship caused her to worry about her emotional stability, which negatively affected her public image. Barton's chances of winning the custody battle seemed stronger in light of this revelation. Jennifer's family feared that the defense would use her online relationship to tarnish her reputation during the hearings. However, they understood her actions, as she had been seeking comfort and emotional connection after spending years in a relationship with Barton, whom she no longer loved. Her correspondence with Chris continued up until the final moments of her life. The police eventually discovered the true identity of Jennifer's online correspondent, a woman named Anita, from Missouri, a mother of 2 children who had simply been searching for a pen pal. Anita had introduced herself as a man when she began communicating with Jennifer. Sharing her struggles, Anita found common ground with Jennifer, though the 2 women had never met in person. Importantly, Anita had no connection to Jennifer's death. Meanwhile, prosecutors faced significant challenges in the case, as Barton's defense team excelled in highlighting flaws in the investigation. The most significant issue was the lack of evidence directly connecting the weapon to Barton. A pivotal development shifted the course of the case when the Supreme Court investigated telephone wiretaps. It was discovered that, on November 30, 2004, Barton had a face-to-face conversation with his friend Richard in Alabama, rather than communicating over the phone as previously believed. The investigation revealed that the weapon used in the crime belonged to Richard, leading to significant progress in the case. Just 1 day after Barton filed for divorce and 5 days before the murder, he visited Richard, the owner of the weapon. This revelation greatly strengthened the prosecution's position. In September, an investigator handed the prosecutor a note from the Alabama police chief, revealing critical new information. The note stated that Richard had been questioned about the weapon. During the interrogation, the police chief reported that Richard had admitted Barton approached him on November 30, 2004, seeking the weapon for self-defense. Barton, worried that his wife might be unfaithful and amid a contentious divorce, feared for his safety. Richard willingly handed the weapon over to Barton, which proved to be a key breakthrough in the case. This new evidence directly links Barton to the weapon and confirms that his wife, Jennifer, was unable to access it. A major challenge for Barton's defense team arose just days before the trial was set to begin, when this critical information was revealed. The development gave the district attorney newfound confidence in securing a conviction. The prosecutor approached Barton's lawyers with a final offer: if Barton confessed to the murders, he could avoid capital punishment and instead face life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. This was an important consideration, as both Dolly's and Jennifer's cases carried the potential for the death penalty. After discussions among authorities across various counties, a deal was negotiated. Barton would receive life imprisonment with parole eligibility if he admitted his guilt. Barton's attorneys presented the offer to him, and after careful deliberation, an agreement was made. On Friday, September 15, 2006, Barton appeared in court. Instead of mounting a defense for acquittal or fighting the possibility of capital punishment, Barton surprised everyone by confessing to the crimes. Faced with the overwhelming evidence amassed by the prosecutor's office, Barton understood that his chances of winning a jury trial were slim. He made the choice to confess, likely motivated by the desire to avoid the risk of execution and to secure a chance at life in prison. Ultimately, Barton weighed his options and made his decision. His confession was a shocking revelation for Dolly's family, who had long since lost hope of receiving such news. Despite their initial disbelief, it became widely believed that Barton was responsible for the deaths of Jennifer and Dolly. The defense argued that Barton's actions were driven by a desire to spare his children the pain of losing another loved one. However, many viewed this assertion as hypocritical and unconvincing. In reality, Barton seemed primarily concerned with saving himself from a lethal injection. Jennifer's 2 sons, Dalton and Dylan Corbin, were placed in the care of Jennifer's sister, Heather. Their father was sentenced to life in prison, and all contact with him was permanently severed. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Caroline Crouch. This case brings us to Glyka Nera, a coastal town near central Athens in Greece. Caroline Crouch's parents moved to Greece from England when she was 8 years old, and they lived there for all the following years. At the age of 15, Caroline met her future husband, Bobish, in the town of Alonissos, where her parents had settled. Bobish's parents had a summer house for recreation, which he often visited. Although he was 14 years older, Caroline and Bobish eventually started dating and then living together. In 2019, they got married. Bobish was successful and respected. He held the position of helicopter pilot, and Caroline was studying at the university, hoping to enter the School of Public Catering. Caroline, 20, lived there with her 34-year-old husband, Bobish Anagnostopoulos, and her black belt in boxing. She loved animals and got herself a husky puppy when he was only 2 months old. Caroline named the dog Roxy and devoted a lot of time to the pet. In addition to the puppy, there were 4 more cats. A few weeks after their wedding, Caroline found out she was pregnant. Unfortunately, after only 3 months, her pregnancy was interrupted. However, there were no complications. After that, she was able to conceive again and gave birth to a beautiful girl, whom her parents named Lydia. Caroline's world revolved around Lydia. Everyone who knew her said that motherhood was absolutely everything to her. On May 11, 2021, the police received a call from a house in Glyka Nera, which turned out to be the home of Caroline and Bobish. The officers were told a story so horrifying that even the oldest and most experienced detectives were in complete shock. When the police arrived at the house in question, they were confronted with a horrific scene. Caroline was severely injured, and little Lydia was screaming and trying to wake her mother up. Tragically, Caroline was lying on the bed and was already dead. Her husband, Bobish, was tied up and handcuffed, with his eyes taped shut. Bobish told the police that a gang of robbers had broken into the house early in the morning while everyone was asleep. One of the gang members put a gun to little Lydia's head and demanded to know where the hidden money was. Bobish indicated where the money was and begged them not to hurt the child. Caroline, who practiced boxing, tried to resist, but several people immediately immobilized her. The leader of the gang personally strangled her, taking all the cash and jewelry. The bandits left, having tied up Bobish and taped his mouth and eyes. As a result, he lost consciousness. When Bobish came to his senses, he managed to find a phone through a small gap in the tape over his eyes using his nose. He dialed the last number in the call log, which was a neighbor's number. When the neighbor picked up, heard muffled sounds and moaning, realizing the situation, the neighbor rushed to Bobish's house, helped him call the police, and recalled later that he had heard some sounds from the neighboring house but did not attach any importance to them. When the police began to inspect the house, they established that more than £10,000 in cash had been stolen, as well as jewelry worth £20,000. Bobish said the family had recently bought a plot of land and had to pay some workers. He also suggested that someone had warned the gang, or that someone within the gang must have known about the family's financial situation in advance. The brutal nature of the crime sent shockwaves throughout Greece and soon spread around the world. The police were equally horrified and commented on how rare such crimes were in their country. The public was outraged and panicked, extending a helping hand to offer support to Bobish and his family. Although there were cameras and video surveillance around the family's house, there was little usable footage, as the cameras were not working or had not been turned on during the robbery and subsequent murder. Footage from an outdoor camera captured a car driving by around the time of the robbery, but the high fence obstructed the view of the make or license plate. Unfortunately, DNA collected from beneath Caroline's fingernails was inconclusive, and there were no witnesses. The only accounts came from the neighbor and Bobish himself. This story spread through the media like wildfire, and soon the world was waiting to see who would be arrested for this terrible crime. Government officials announced a €300,000 reward 3 days after Caroline's death for information about the massacre. All shops, bars, and restaurants on the island of Alonissos closed in solidarity, as 2,000 residents mourned a woman they had accepted as their own and felt deeply insulted by the crime. During the investigation, Babiš was offered to take a test to determine what language the bandits used when they communicated with him. He was able to identify it as Albanian, but this was not certain. After reviewing 150 photographs, Babiš managed to narrow down the list of suspects to 10 people. There was an Albanian gang that had been involved in very brutal robberies, subjecting victims to torture and beatings, with similar cases occurring 6 months prior. The police intensified their efforts to find anyone connected to the gang, utilizing their findings and knowledge, as well as Babiš's list of 10 suspects. They came across one specific person described by Babiš as a broad-shouldered man, approximately 165 centimeters tall, with short blonde hair, a known brutal abuse with a history of hating women. The police began investigating potential connections between this individual and another suspect who had robbed the home of a pilot instructor in Babiš's squad 3 years ago. Additionally, the police had another suspect named Yanis, who was also reported to be working with the gang. Soon after the funeral, a resident of Georgia attracted the attention of the authorities due to possessing a fake passport. After DNA samples were taken from him, it turned out he was involved in a home invasion, but it occurred at a different location and happened 4 days before the attack on Caroline's home. Both cases were later scrutinized. Significant differences led to the Georgian resident being eliminated as a suspect when nothing linked him to Caroline's apartment. At the same time, experts expressed concern, noting that as time went on, there was less hope of finding the culprit. Police sources told local media that there was so little evidence found in the house that it seemed as if the robbers had thoroughly cleaned the crime scene and erased their tracks before leaving. Caroline's husband was frequently called to the police station, and he obediently came with a mournful expression, conscientiously answering all of the investigators' many questions. The detectives studied the chronology of those days, the work schedules of Babiš and Caroline. They sought as much information as possible about the couple and their relationship. Babiš shared much information, but the diary found in the house painted a very different picture than what him presented. In her diary, Caroline described Babiš as rude and cruel, revealing that she had been trying to leave him for a long time. Caroline first told her husband about her desire to leave in July 2020, when their daughter Lydia was born. She expressed that she had become increasingly unhappy and was searching for a new home. However, she began to doubt her decision, thinking about her daughter growing up in a single-parent family. Later, she wrote that Babiš had control over her and had installed a tracking app on her phone. When Caroline attended therapy sessions, he could hear everything discussed. The couple's family consultant, Elaine, learned from Caroline that she was looking for an apartment in central Athens for herself and Lydia, near the culinary school she dreamed of attending. Despite often visiting a family psychologist with her husband's knowledge, one day, out of the blue, Caroline received a text from Elaine asking her to stop their sessions. She believes this is from the effects of Babiš. According to entries in Caroline's diary, tensions were high, and the situation escalated quickly. One entry stated, "Today my baby turned 1 month old. It was also the day I told myself I wanted to leave. I feel terrible." Another entry read, "I am thinking of leaving for my sister, but I know that I can't leave my baby. This life hurts me." They say the psychologist encouraged Caroline to trust her mother, but she replied that she didn't want to disappoint her. Prosecutors claimed the murder was entirely intentional, pointing to the cameras being turned off before the killing and the memory cards being removed as calculated coincidences. 38 days after the scene of violence and robbery, during a memorial service for Caroline, police officers approached Babiš with a request to come with them for another interrogation. Babiš begged to wait until the service ended, but he was told this matter could not wait, as someone had been detained and his identification was needed. He was advised not to call anyone and to hide his phone while following them. This was actually a set-up, as the police needed Babiš himself as a suspect. The entire situation was becoming increasingly confusing and hard to believe. Inconsistencies and discrepancies emerged. Based on Caroline's diary entries and Babiš's story, the police realized they needed to focus on him rather than looking for a gang. When analyzing data from Caroline's smartwatch, they found that she had been in a state of extreme mental or physical stress for 6 minutes around 4 a.m., leading them to conclude that she died at a different time than what Babiš claimed. Geolocation data from his phone indicated that Babish had been walking up and down the stairs of the house for several hours, just when he claimed he was tied up by gangsters and unable to move. After 8 hours of intense questioning and reviewing all the evidence the police had gathered, Babish finally broke down. He played the part for weeks, but now the police assert that the gang attack story was a lie and that he himself killed his wife because she threatened to leave him, then staged the crime scene. An examination of some evidence and digital data has provided clues. If the police are correct, then this crime comes down to the actions of one cruel husband. Babish admitted that the robbery was staged. The acts committed against Caroline and her beloved dog were horrific. The police noted that when they arrived at the crime scene on May 11th, they already had suspicions about Babish but lacked sufficient evidence. He had played a cunning game, cooperating with the press to manipulate the narrative of his grief, all while deceiving everyone. The police wondered if there was another potential motive for the murder: money. It turned out that Babish had led a very wasteful lifestyle. Recently, they had gone on a luxurious holiday, during which they spent a large sum of money. They also bought land and designed their dream home worth £14,000. There was also information that Babish had been involved in the transportation of banned substance, earning money for his luxurious lifestyle by transporting them via his helicopter. Caroline's father is sure that there is a lot of truth in this information, having studied the chronology of events and the data the police compiled. In Babish's testimony, what happened in the early morning of May 11th was concerning. At some point in the evening, Caroline texted her friend that she was leaving Babish. Data from her phone showed that she had been trying to book a hotel for herself for the next day, but she decided to spend that night at home. At 12:35 a.m., Babish was seen at their child's crib while Caroline was upstairs texting her friend. At 1:20 a.m., Babish took out the memory card from the CCTV camera inside the house. Then they started to quarrel over the text messages. According to this data, Caroline's pulse jumped 50% at 4:05 a.m. when Babish smothered her with a pillow. 5 to 6 minutes later, at 4:11 a.m. the watch stopped recording her heartbeat. He placed their young daughter next to her dead mother on the bed in an attempt to create a convincing and shocking crime scene. He then threw clothes around the house to stage a robbery. At one point, he also got rid of Caroline's pet husky. The finale of his scheme was tying himself up and taping himself. Just 2 hours later, at 6 a.m., Babish called to report a fake robbery. An expert stated that Caroline died in torment, and, with the help of her smartwatch, it became clear that she was resisting with all her might. In his speech in court, Babish described the strangulation of his wife as a hug. He claimed that Caroline tried to move away from him while they were lying in bed, so he held her tightly. When she tried to turn face down, he continued to hold her, pressing her hard against the pillow until she stopped moving. This continued for 5 minutes. Afterward, it seemed like Babish tried to stir her or wake her up, but it was in vain, and then he realized that it was all over. Babish claimed that he killed Caroline to protect his daughter. According to him, his wife was cruel, verbally abusive towards both him and Lydia, and he acted in the heat of the moment. He insisted that when he killed his wife, he had no intention of lying and that all his actions were driven by the desire to protect his daughter. This statement was considered very unfair and offensive to those who knew Caroline. Lydia was her life. Caroline idolized her child and would never have allowed harm to come to her baby. Babish Anagnostopoulos was charged with 2 serious crimes: first, murder in a completely calm mental state, and second, cruelty to animals. Additionally, he was accused of repeatedly giving false testimony, thus misleading the investigation. Although his lawyers worked to defend him and argued that the murder was committed under the influence of emotions, this should not affect the fair verdict of the court. The case has caused a public outcry and prompted protesters to march in the streets with signs and slogans declaring "No to domestic violence." On May 16, 2022, about a month after the trial began, a jury found Babish guilty of manslaughter while in a calm state, murder of a domestic animal, false reporting, and false testimony. He was sentenced to life in prison and an additional 10 years for the execution of a domestic dog, as well as a fine of €21,000. Additionally, Babish received another year and 6 months for misleading the authorities. Caroline's parents wanted to erase all mention of Babish from their memory in any way they could. They began by removing the word wife from the tombstone on Caroline's grave. It now reads mother and daughter, Caroline Crouch. They were also granted full custody of baby Lydia, while Babish's parents were denied custody but allowed to visit their granddaughter 5 times a month. Despite everything, Babish and Caroline's parents maintain a good relationship and work to ensure Lydia has a happy life. The Caroline Crouch case is not only a family tragedy but also a heartbreaking reminder of the reality of domestic violence hidden behind a perfect facade. More than a year after Caroline's tragic death on May 11, 2021, the sentence handed down to Babish and Agnostopoulos has closed a painful chapter, bringing some measure of justice to her and her family, although it cannot erase the suffering they have endured. The life sentence and additional penalties not only punish Babish's cruel actions but also send a strong message that such crimes will not be tolerated, regardless of how skillfully the perpetrators attempt to cover them up. For the Greek community and the world, this case has evoked deep sympathy and sparked a movement against domestic violence, urging people to reconsider the potential dangers in their own homes.